morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. This is the meeting of the Northport Village Corporation Board of Overseers. I'm John Spritz, the president, and it's January. I welcome you all here. We have almost everybody here. Dick Brockway had informed me that he was under the weather but not be attending. Amy thinks that he may be attending to our clock. He had made some reference to it, I think, a meeting or two back about fixing it, taking care of it. So I'm trusting that the clock is with Dick. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the November 18th meeting of this board? Lee, second? Second, Judy. Any discussion?
What are we doing?
We're approving the minutes of the November 18th.
Yes, I do. On page 2 under the tree warden report, the way I read it, it sounds like there was a $5,300 tree to take down. And that $5,300 quote was for several trees, so that can be clarified in there. Do you want me to put the words in that? Or I would say for, for tree work, not just one tree for historical purposes. I don't want somebody years ago. And secondly, I do believe that this assessment or the recap of the usage for the community hall should be part of the notes. So again, we have this historical documentation to look back on annually. We can kind of go to the December meeting. And you can just amend, you can just add that as an addendum, I would think. Okay. Attachment. Yep.
Any further discussion? So we'll have the notes as amended with tree work, and we'll add the community hall wrap up also.
Yeah.
It was second by Judy. Any further discussion? All in favor? I think that's unanimous. We have a point here for questions and issues from Bayside residents and meeting attendees. I've learned just now from Mike that we have some people here to make a brief presentation, perhaps take questions on the Nordic Farms issue. And I don't know how large a discussion that may be, so I'm willing to have it now. This is really, the board can determine this. If you'd like to hear this now, or would like to hear this further down at the infrastructure discussion.
I just like to set it up.
I guess we're hearing it now. Mike, go ahead and set it up.
Are we? Does everybody agree?
Are people okay with that?
Is this an information sharing presentation that we're hearing? So this isn't a question or this is just information sharing?
Information sharing, I'm sure if you have questions, they will answer them, right? Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Mike, go ahead.
I think the presentation will be short. It's really about what, just letting people know. So, as you know, I've been sort of tracking this a bit, and we've taken somewhat of a neutral stance because they haven't really pumped out much science yet to really explain what they're doing. And to me, it's becoming more and more clear that they're mostly interested in getting it approved, and we'll work on all the details together. And that, to me, the presentations that they've presented have always been the rosy picture. Okay, this is what it's like on a normal day in July when there's no wind and this and that. And they haven't really analyzed any sort of upset conditions. They're permitting in a piecemeal fashion. You have two ways to permit a project. One is to put in all your permits, and when you put them all in, there's information in all of them that kind of rationalize the whole project. Or, and it's up to the proponent, you can put them in one at a time. They're putting them in one at a time, but unfortunately they're not providing much information. So they'll get an update on what happened. The two people that are here are from Upstream Watch, which is a group that was formed to really, I know you probably have read in the papers that there's a sort of a pro group and an anti-group, okay? And the pro group is let them do whatever they want, pretty much. And the anti-group is we don't want any sort of killing a fish, let's just say, is sort of their end of it. And then sort of have followed the whole time, and well, where's the science that suggests that this is not going to be harmful to the bay and to the area right outside of our mooring field, essentially. And I don't think that they have done that yet. And I also don't think that they've gotten all their ducks in line for the one permit that they have put in for, and they'll talk a little bit about that. So I just wanted to set that up first. So this group is really, they're not anti-farm, RAS farms or pro-RAS farms. It's more about the science and making sure that it's done properly.
Well, welcome. And it would be helpful, since we have a camera that's recording this, if you could stand up and introduce yourself and sort of stand at the edge of that table. And from that point, I believe that we'll be able to capture it. And we look forward to your brief presentation.
Thank you.
Can I just ask
Yes.
you how much time we're going to take on this?
It's just going to be,
Not much.
Oh,
It's really about, honestly, it'll be about your questions, however long.
but we
Is it
have a
5
full
minutes or
agenda,
25
so.
minutes? That's what I'm wondering. Is it 5 minutes or 25 minutes?
5.
Great.
Unless you choose to make it more.
Go ahead, take it away.
I don't care if you wish, I'm not the most photogenic guy in the room, so.
As long as we can hear you.
Could you
Right.
introduce
Speak.
yourself?
Speak.
My name is David Losey. I moved here to Camden 3 years ago. I've had a place on Islesboro for 35 years. I retired, I thought, 3 years ago. I made a mistake assuming that. I was volunteering with the Coastal Mountain Land Trust. They asked me to come up and look at the reservoirs and dams in Belfast, which Belfast was talking about doing the land trust or selling the land trust. Then Nordic came along and threw it all into our contact. I met then a third group. Mike talked about the anti-group and then what I'm doing. There is another group. You haven't heard of us because they're quiet, it's upstream watch. Our position is keep your mouth shut, stay out of the paper, hire some scientists and evaluate what Nordic has proposed to do. If it's good, so be it. If it's a problem, then the government needs to know where the problems are from people who are truly qualified to address it. One of the reasons that we're here at this hour, given that how many months it's been over here, they've been proposing this is, let me show you this map. Hold up to the camera briefly. And notice this is the map which the applicant presented to the government, to different agencies. What's missing from the map? Oh, Northport. They told DEP it was all in Belfast. No need to give notice to Northport. No need to consider Northport abutters. For it or against it, being without notice, is an issue, and that's one reason we're here to let you know this is happening. This was Plan 1. Plan 1 trespassed across a number of pieces of land. We were able to convince DEP that was so and asked them to dismiss the application. Instead of that, they went to Nordic and said, hey guys, we got to fix this. So, Plan 2, which, for your record, Plan 2 has what Kim calls the twisted sister line coming out of the pipe, does all kinds of gyrations. In an attempt, once again, to pretend Northport doesn't exist, but to get it out in between the property lines. Now you notice none of the properties on the Northport side are shown. Reason for that, as you know, there's not get into the details of this, but as you know, you own the upland, you own the intertidal zone, subject to other people's rights, etc. But you also own, as a shoreline owner, partly an interest in the littoral zone that is 1,000 feet. It's not a fee interest like, but you do have an interest there. And they can't go across that without your permission. If you find somebody who can put the Northport properties on the map and the Belfast properties, it looks like this. The Northport properties are in pink, Belfast in green. Those boxes shooting out there are the intertidal and littoral zones, which are appended to the properties owned by people, sorry, and in
Sorry,
Belfast.
they'll never see it.
Sorry.
Too small, too far away.
The point is that they can't get out into the bay without going across either the intertidal zone or the littoral zone, or both, of a number of Northport residents, as well as it turns out, because they goofed, Belfast residents. So we presented this, and Kim drafted a lovely motion to dismiss. I thought it was a lovely piece of lawyering, which has been ignored. The DEP and the Department of Agriculture sent it to the Attorney General's office, which has said nothing. They've been deathly silent. We have now seen a new group of surveyors, Thursday and Friday, up, well, they're up right about here. It looks like they're going to try and come down Route 1 and then pop over this way and come out on top. We don't know whether when they come into the bay, they're going to try and go straight out into the deeper water, or whether they're going to follow the course that they follow with their other pipelines, and that is parallel to Northport. It's been suggested to me that they're going to go into the water a little bit north of here and then come back to their original pipeline because they want to end where they want to end, which brings it back to Northport. We haven't seen it, so we don't know. The purpose of our being here is to say you should know about it. If you'd like these maps, I can leave them with you. We have copies. We have asked for a hearing. We've been denied. Who denied you? DEP. We have asked for reconsideration of that. And one of the reasons we asked for reconsideration was, well, first of all, they said they denied us because it was in one town. There's the town line, for heaven's sakes. The pipe goes across it, no matter which way you do it. So we've said that was dumb and obvious. But beyond that, you say you don't have to give us a public hearing because the public hearing is to make sure the staff has all the technical advice they need. That's what your criteria are. Well, there's another criteria. If you put a pipe out here which devalues the property of people in Northport, and suddenly their houses' values start to plummet, you've got the town saying, well, what's this all about? Maybe this corporation saying, what's this all about? You've got people who are not happy with the value of their property. So that is a taking of value, which can be done, but only with due process of law. Due process starts with a hearing, and what I'm trying to say to DEP is, wake up. It's not just do your technical people need help. It's can you avoid a due process violation, which would be really embarrassing and cause a lot of problems for everybody. So please reconsider our request for a hearing. That also rests with our new Attorney General. So you've got a long agenda. I thank you for your time. If you'd like these, I'll leave them here. And Kim and I are here and happy to answer questions if you have any. And get on your agenda and I'll get out of your way.
Any immediate questions that people want to raise? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
I have one other thing to add here.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Kim Tucker, and I'm the other lawyer on this. I'm also the lawyer for the Maine Lobstering Union. I was the lawyer on the Searsport tank case, one of the lawyers on that, and I was the lawyer that fought the Searsport dredge. David is very modest there. He's not going to tell you that he is an expert in the Clean Water Act. I'm a lawyer that worked for the Attorney General of Florida for 17 years. I worked for the Attorney General of Mississippi on Deepwater Horizon. I also have a house on Islesboro, which I've semi-abandoned since my mother moved over here when my dad died, and I spotted her house on the mainland because it's a lot easier. But the other concern we have that I think you need to be aware of is Nordic has talked about this, and as the lawyer for the Maine Lobstering Union, we pretty much kept our powder dry on this because, you know, a land-based salmon farm didn't sound like a bad idea, and we're very anti-salmon pen farming because it destroys the bottom for lobstering for decades after they leave. So having this land-based, you know, seemed like it was a positive thing. How they were approaching the one in Bucksport seemed like a positive thing. But this one, they keep moving the goalpost. And at the point when David came to me and said that they want to dump 7.7 million gallons a day of wastewater into the bay, that got my attention. To put that in perspective, the entire town of Belfast, with every use they have, is only authorized out of their water treatment facility to dump 1.49 million gallons a day of treated water. So it's basically 5 times the entire city of Belfast generates for this one facility, dumping in the bay in Northport's water, right off Northport. They originally said they were going to put this in deep water, and this was going to be carried out to the bay and nothing to see here, people. Now they're putting it in only 36 feet of water. They have moved the pipe from 1.5 miles long to then 1 mile long to then 1 kilometer long. Now we don't know how long it will be, and now we've got the Twisted Sister that's very long, but is only dumping into 36 feet of water right off of Northport's plant.
And just bear in mind that they start counting the distance from basically Route 1. So it goes along, it goes thousands of feet before you, or hundreds of feet anyway, before you get to what we consider sort of the normalized shoreline.
One concern I have in terms of Bayside is, and we've been told by one of the water experts we've consulted with, and I just spent 2 hours on the phone with Neil Pettigrew, who was a professor at the University of Maine, who for 30 years is the expert on the currents in this area. And I know from my work on the Searsport dredge that they call currents out here the washing machine because they're so complex. And they scour out the pock marks, and so I was familiar in that context with, this is a very complicated area. You can't just say, sure, I'm going to shoot it out the pipe and it's going to go away. And this notion of the solution to pollution is dilution, that's not really actually true. And certainly from the perspective of the lobstermen, we depend on our reputation for wholesomeness of our and pristine nature of our bays. For the brand of the Maine lobster brand. So when you start saying, I'm going to dump straight out 7.7 million gallons a day of schmutz in the water, and I don't even know what that is, it gets our attention. So that's when I started working with David, and our one concern for you to be aware of is, there is a possibility because your water treatment facility permit is dependent upon the level of quality of water that's right off this area, which is quite high. If you dump this in that area, and their own expert that Nordic hired has suggested that as they dump it, it takes 14 days before it moves out. So that's 14 times 7.7 million that's accumulating before it goes anywhere. And where it goes is a big question, and it depends on where they put the pipeline, how long the pipeline is, what the pipeline looks like, what they've got pushing it. They're not even looking at the impact of wind, because we never get wind here, right? Yeah.
That was one of my questions at the beginning.
They don't look at tides, they don't look at wind, they don't look at, they're talking about every day, day in, day out, without fail, they're gonna dump this. Like, do they have a place to put it on those days we can't dump it because of the weather, or the neap tides, or the nor'easters, or the, apparently not, because they're just talking about, like, every day is a sunny day in July, because it's the one day they looked at for salinity and everything else. So there is a possibility, according to our water expert, that if they do this and damage the water quality off of Northport, that Bayside's water treatment facility would have to upgrade to secondary treatment. It should be immensely expensive. And you all would not get 1 penny of tax dollars, but could have the possibility of plummeting tax values like we saw with Searsport when they talked about the tank. Most of the valuation is in the waterfront properties, but they would all plummet because there was an exploding bond account. So
Lee?
How would Northport, where the utilities goes and measures so that we can get our permit, how would we ever be able to get a correct measurement once this goes in?
I think that we measure from the plant and measure the dilutions from the plant. So we measure our numbers before it gets into the water. We don't measure the quality of the water in the bay, we measure the quality of what we put into the bay. But Kim is correct. There's a lot of moving pieces to keep track of here.
Yeah, thanks, Kim.
Thank
And
you.
one last thought, just to put it in perspective. So the discharge they're talking about is not probably, it's like 2 orders of magnitude. It's about 120 times what we discharge on a daily basis. Flow.
If it's 7.7 million gallons a day, it's way more.
Oh, then our limit.
Yeah.
That's
Our
their
limit is
limit.
63,000, we
Right.
only actually ever discharge approximately 30,000.
Right, right. But that would be their limit too,
Yeah.
so we don't know what their actual discharge is. But I'm saying if you're comparing limits.
Right.
Right, it's 100, you know. So, one bad day from them is a couple of years of our discharge, honestly. So we just need to keep, and I apologize for
No, that's all right.
hijacking the agenda, just to get that out there. So because we want to track it, and the next stop is the town meeting tomorrow night, and the same sort of thing there, so that they understand.
Right.
And we'll keep it on.
So to this point, the Northport Village Corporation has not engaged this issue. We've listened to presentations, and we're sort of following what's going on. And it may be the will of the board at some point to take some action on this. I don't know. That's up to you. But thus far, we're not. And if individuals or groups here want to further engage, it sounds like Mike is the point person to be involved with it. All right? Any other questions or issues from audience attendees, meeting attendees?
Mr. Chairman, would you like us to remain to answer questions at the end of the meeting, or can
I don't
have
think
you
you need
ruin your
to.
day and maybe your year?
You've done your job. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. And thanks for leaving that material behind. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
It's now time for the report of the president. I have noted here gift certificate for the salt and sand distributor. I can't recall if we actually did that or not. We did do that. Excellent. I love to click things off. Welcome to our new overseer, Jeffrey Wilt, sitting at the edge here. Thank you for joining us, Jeff. Appreciate it. Jeff is filling out Wendy Huntoon's term, which was a 1-year term, so he is obliged to be with us only up to the annual meeting. Where things go after that is yet to be determined, but we certainly appreciate your joining us and contributing. I'm going to come back to the safety in a second, but I want to swing to the Bayside Arts issue. This was something that was brought up at our November meeting, that it was felt that it was important to have a presentation by Bayside Arts about what plans and intentions were for the upcoming season, and particularly in terms of the manipulation of scenery, etc. upstairs. So are we going to have a presentation from Bayside Arts?
I was not ever asked to give a presentation, but I just have one little thing to say that relates to that scenery, which I could do in less than a minute.
Please.
We would like to build a door on the front of the stage, wide enough so that we can slide all of that scenery into it underneath the stage. I have looked under there to make sure there's enough room for that. The stage is supported by large beams that facing that you see when you look at the stage from out in the audience is not supporting anything. So we would propose to cut that and put it on hinges with a latch and little wooden knobs and reinstall it, and it would look very similar to what it looks now. You'd probably be able to see the hinges, but it wouldn't change much, and it certainly will not have any impact on the support structure. Then we would purchase a thing with wheels, put all that scenery on top of this thing and just roll it underneath and close the doors. I understand that the concern has to do with the scenery itself, when it's up and when it's not up, and I will undertake to talk to John about that John Woolsey, when I have an opportunity to meet with him or talk with him on the telephone. We usually make a presentation to the board quite a bit later. Our program woman has just gotten started recruiting events for next year. We do expect to have the full lineup of events, and we do expect to come here, as we did last year, and make a presentation to the board. We would expect to ask you again for rent-free use of the hall when we are not charging anything, and we would expect to pay the regular rent for 1 or 2 events where we would be charging for tickets. So if there's other questions, I'll try to answer them, but
Who's going to pay for this change to the stage?
oh, we're going to pay for it, obviously. We'll cover all the costs, and usually we're able to get volunteer labor, but we'll cover any material.
Mike?
Where's the scenery now?
I haven't looked lately. My understanding was that John took down enough of it so that the electricians could do their work. Is
Yeah,
that?
and they never did do the work. They didn't come back to do it.
Okay. But he did take down enough so
Took
they
down
could do that?
2 panels.
2 panels. So a lot of it is still mounted there. I want to ask John if he can re-engineer that so that it's possible to install it and uninstall it without getting up on a huge ladder. In other words, to have some supports maybe about midway up the panels, because I'm not going up on those big ladders. And I'm the person that usually gets called and asked to take it down, and I'm happy to do that if we can re-engineer it so that it's possible to do it without getting up on tall ladders.
Mike?
Over the summer, I was asked to meet with John to discuss this, and we did, and we looked at it, and at the time, we decided that we shouldn't do the modifications to that, because I don't think the board got what the village wants, which is the ability for it to be moved fairly quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
I envision that if after a performance, it's down within a couple of days, unless there's something, in the schedule that says that's silly, because
Right.
2 days we're gonna put it back up. But this summer, there were long spans where it was up, and a lot of other people used the hall.
Right.
And, and the fact that it's white like that just
Yeah.
takes away from the feel of the hall in general. There are a lot of people that use it, so I would say before we do any modifications, we confirm that the thing can be dismantled in a day or two, and there's a commitment that would happen. That would be my suggestion.
Well, that's what I want to talk with John
Yeah,
about,
so-
because
yeah.
John has somewhat resisted that, but I think that if I speak with him about, say, this meeting and previous meetings.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the solution needs to be either that you need to do something to take that down and get it out of the way,
Right.
or you need to start over and put something up that everybody agrees is something that should be somewhat permanent, like curtains or something that would.
That's right.
that,
But my
you
take
just take the
also,
curtains off. You see what I mean? Leave
Yeah,
the metal,
yeah.
like something like that would be.
my take is that really very few of our performers have really had any interest in using that, so it's been up just because we put it up for the season.
Okay.
I think I can work with John and come back to you with
That'd be great.
a proposal.
Yeah, my recollection going back a couple of years is that when Bayside Arts proposed using the space,
Right.
that they said, oh, and we'd like to have some panels up there too, and
Yeah.
we sort of said, of course it makes sense. And instead, that visual look has come to dominate the stage throughout the year, and so we're looking for a way to work with Bayside Arts
Right.
such that the community hall can be returned to its normal look most of the
I
time.
appreciate that, and I will talk with John and other members of our board and get back to you.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Bill.
Back to the part of opening up the face of the stage, putting that in. I think that is doable, but as a village agent, I would like to look at the structure of the stage, because as you know, when you get a bunch of people on that stage, it's pretty springy.
Yeah.
Before we start getting into doing anything like that,
Sure.
we need to know what we got underneath for a structure for the other part, in
Well, let's-
case we have to do that.
Let's look at it
same time.
together.
Look at it, do it all at the same time.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah, well, it might be good to beef up that support, that's what you're saying.
I think
John-
it
John
needs to
is
be beefed up, because it is awful.
It's springy, yeah.
And we're not all skinny like we used to be.
Really?
No, yeah. Thank you very much. This, in fact, was the sort of conversation I was hoping would occur, so at least we have some forward progress on this issue. Safety committee status, I sent around to the board some notes that I had said I would try and present to you a couple of months ago at our last meeting in November. I think I spelled dingy duck there, but
Freudian slip.
Freudian slip. The intent was, as I said, to sort of set the table. I don't necessarily expect that we'll have a conversation right now. It might be that we have some people pursue this outside of the board with some sort of ad hoc committee. But it's clearly a situation where the safety committee is sitting there waiting, is sort of stepped to the side, as it were, and is waiting for this board to give them greater direction. So right now, I'd like to open up at least for conversation in response to this from anybody.
Specifically for the data or?
No, no.
The status of the
Status of-
personnel, the role of the safety
Okay.
committee members vis-a-vis the personnel responsibilities that it has. Is that a fair summary of these concerns?
That's number one. There's a reason that's number one on the list, I think, is that there was concern about volunteer members of the safety committee, and we have Gina here now, perhaps taking on over time greater responsibilities than they felt comfortable with. And that since our overseer, who was the chair of that committee, has stepped down, it seemed like this was a juncture to re-examine what we expect out of that committee.
Gina, do you want to say anything?
I think I've said it.
Well, you haven't said it to this group, though. You.
Oh, okay.
Well, you did give us a nice memo. There was a good
We did
memo,
get her notes.
and Michael
Yeah.
did a
okay.
good summary.
Oh,
Sure, I think I would be repeating things that everybody knows, but
And,
thanks.
and thank you for
Sure.
recognizing that there's no reason to say something twice.
Okay.
I think Michael's service on the committee is a wonderful transition point to Michael becoming the chair of the safety committee, if he would be willing to do it. I don't think that it is, we're doing a lot of planning, which is important, but we're starting to use ad hoc committees instead of this table, and I worry about us undermining or diluting the public policy aspects, the public meeting aspects. So if we were jumping to how do we solve the concerns that this really diligent body of community volunteers have expressed, one way to do that is to reinvigorate the safety committee by appointing someone on this board to chair it. And to me, Michael is the best person for that because he's sat on that set fence here. And I'm not seeing positive or negative statements, I'm just seeing listening. And from there, I think we have also been talking about the personnel committee pieces. So a lot of these things here about who is responsible for hiring, vetting, supervising, really are appropriately in that personnel space. The personnel space for 100 years has been in the hands of the president. I think it makes sense to continue to review that personnel space the way we've been talking about it in terms of the committee to assist the officers of the organization, president, treasurer, clerk, in running the organization that way. So and the final piece, this always overarching piece about community volunteers being concerned about personal liability, that's a very appropriate grown-up concern. We have MMA insurance. People serving in an official capacity, whether they're paid or unpaid, sitting at this table or sitting somewhere else, you would be covered if someone sued you for negligence. And so if you punched someone in the face, your MMA coverage would be or not. Get yourself some umbrella policy. And so all of these concerns, which I'm really pleased have been articulated, are doable if we step back, remind ourselves that there's 7 people sitting at this table, 6 today, sitting at this table who have already been charged with the task of performing the obligations under the charter. I get a police department, get a fire department, have sewer, water, maintain the roads. If Michael would be the chair, that solves a big piece of the problem.
Jeff?
How many overseers are on the safety committee, other than Mike?
Just one. Clerk.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amy, or, yeah. the
She's not an
officer.
overseer.
She's an officer.
Prior to Wendy's resignation, it was 2 plus me.
So is there a sense that we should have some number of overseers on that committee? So, again, just to have more representation from this group on that.
I think that it is not necessarily the number of overseers. I think that it is the degree to which there is sufficient and regular interaction with and oversight of our police chief, the lifeguards. Those are the primary individuals who are involved here. And this past year, for completely understandable reasons, our police department has become a lot more official. I'm looking now at a locked door across the hall there that used to be our police officer sitting at a desk in the office. We now have a separate room. We've amped up significantly, I think, the responsibilities and seriousness of our police department. And that requires greater oversight. And it may be that that is beyond what a volunteer on an irregular basis can provide.
To answer,
Wait, Vicki first.
I think the bylaws say the chairman has to be an overseer. However many overseers choose to be on it because of interest, I think that's great. You know, I'm always, you know, in most cases, more is better generally. I was with you up through, since Michael's been on there and he's aware of it, and as far as chairman, then I kind of lost you after that. And so I'm just going to be a little more specific. I think part of this, the vetting and hiring of lifeguards and the police chief needs to be attended to right away. In discussion, we've talked about who then is responsible for that, and we can throw that back to the safety committee because there's been discussion that because there's an increased confusion about who's boss, I guess is the best way to say it, that we make a determination sometime in the next month as who's going to be the overseer, a paid village employee or somebody on the safety committee or somebody else. And I just want to add that with that closed door, a big part of that was to become compliant with what we've been doing for years, out of compliance. And I'm a big advocate of trying to comply. I think it makes life much easier when everything goes smoothly and when things don't go smoothly, if you can at least sit back and say, we attempted to comply.
Mike?
What did you?
well, I said something, so go ahead.
Okay. I see that the safety committee had sort of morphed into more of an oversight committee, and to me, because of the personnel, because the daily decisions needed to be made about personnel, that they seem to be, in some ways, making decisions. And I think if you compare what the safety committee had become to what the tree committee is, or the infrastructure committee, we do things, but then we go back to the overseers to get approval and so on. And I think that because of the day-to-day aspect of personnel, that had morphed some. So if we pull that part out, I think the safety committee could go back to being what it was before, which is a committee that evaluates an issue and has a bunch of people on it that have a history and understand different aspects of safety, and then comes to the overseers with the recommendation for approval, right? Is that what we're trying to get to?
Right, and the day-to-day oversight of whether or not they came to work on time, whether or not they were outside their boundaries or whatever, and that goes to, yeah, we're saying the same thing.
Okay.
But I do believe it would be helpful if a decision was made here today, because we have to start, you know, lifeguards and police is always taken up to the last minute, is my experience.
Judy?
I do think we need to make a decision today. I don't want to bully Michael into doing it, but I do think he's the right person. also think that we're in a fortunate position, although we lost Wendy, and although the work that the committee has done is overwhelming them, my understanding is that we have lifeguards who have said, we will come back. We have a policeman who has said he would come back. I recognize there are personnel issues that we need to control. I think that the strength of the safety committee comes from their being told that it's the overseers who are the buck stops here. If we have a personnel committee who can deal with those dailiness of, hey, where is he? It's 10:05 and I don't see a lifeguard here. The personnel committee and the safety committee chair can look that through. We have to have a recognition that we meet the least amount of time when the most important decisions are being made. We need to maybe talk about the overseer's obligations being upped in July and August instead of what we usually we do our workshop, we do the budget, we do the warrant, and then we've added an August meeting. Maybe we need to add another August meeting. We need to be here doing what we're elected to do, which is running the organization.
Lee?
To me, it simply gets down to, if you'll chair the committee, and Billy and John Spritz will do the overseeing of the day-to-day things, that would take care of all of it.
Just for the, so the board knows, I am planning to meet following this meeting with our police chief, Michael, to review 2018, to look ahead at 2019. So we'll sit down and have a discussion, not necessarily about what we're talking about here, more about policy issues and performance and expectations. Hey.
I would just like to have some input from Mike.
It's going to face me.
Michael?
Yeah, I think the issue,
You're being
yeah, the
quiet.
chairman thing is a yes, but I think we're talking about two different issues, which is, maybe they come together. The safety committee is saying, as structured and as it's been, a largely more empowered committee over the last however many years, it's basically saying that it's not workable. This is not workable, and that's what this summary and other summaries say. And that's right, so it's unclear to me how we proceed, and I'm really unclear about some of this conversation about, because there's some simple brass tacks that happen every year. Some of it's already set up for next year, the police and lifeguards are pretty much in place, at least at this level in terms of commitments, as I understand it. But going forward, there's the sort of oversight of safety issues, and then there's the operational stuff, the brass tacks operational stuff. It's unclear to me how we're going to address that latter part.
Lee?
What I'm saying is the safety committee will deal with most of this. But the day-to-day operations, who's going to oversee the police or the lifeguards will be Bill and John. And the reason for that is if Billy has to reprimand or do some oversight of the police chief, then he needs John Spritz to back him up. Somebody from this board has got to back him up so that it carries some weight. That will.
I'll take these two questions and then I really want to hand things over to Bill. But first, Jane?
I was going to say exactly that, well, I'm going to say it twice, what you just said. Well, no, I'm confused over. Billy is the village agent. To the extent that we have dysfunction with regard to the policeman, for instance, it's because we, as a body, have not said clearly and consistently, Billy is the village agent. He reports to the overseers through the president. He's the boss. It's our job to say that. I would like to hear from Billy as to whether he would like no one to know he's the boss. If he doesn't want people to know he's the boss, then we need to rethink job descriptions. He is the boss. And to the extent he gets pushback from people, it's because he's too polite to sometimes say, this is the way it's going to be. And I would like him to have the support of us to say, this is going to be the way it's going to be. You show up on time.
Mike?
Yeah, so to get back to what you were saying, right, and I think it fits in with what Judy and Lee were saying too, is I kind of see the safety committee as the group that sort of helps adjust the job descriptions, right? Of what we need from, they're the ones who are thinking about, this is the way it's been, and this is the way it should be going forward. And then once all that is done, I think that might be some of the issues we've had with the policeman that we've talked about a bit. Is I don't think he necessarily knows exactly what the village as a whole wants for him to do. I mean, I'm not saying we're telling him to be a policeman. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is maybe we need to tell him what the goals are in the summer that we want overall for the village. And those things would be something that the safety committee would help develop and then bring it to discussion here. Go ahead, yeah.
No, I'm putting my hand up for when John calls on.
Okay, sorry. Right. So I mean that's the gist of it. So I can see, where they would, and another example would be, say, the dinghy dock thing. Like, since the last meeting, I sort of talked about an ad hoc committee, okay, and I put a bunch of people together. I'm hoping that Jeff could chair that. But that would then work with the safety committee to see if that makes sense from the safety aspect of what they're talking about, because they're talking about short-term and long-term solutions. Does that address the concerns of the safety people when they get to a solution? Like, that's what I would see the safety committee looking at.
And we're going to take a tiny break here because I do want to hear from Bill. We've been referring to you and your role in this, and I don't want this conversation to keep developing and morphing without your stepping in and voicing your.
I do think you're at that point where somebody has to be able to let them know that somebody is in charge. As it was before, it was Wendy's in charge of me. But when I would say something that I'm getting complaints on, and I would say something, or I know that I'm in charge of signing off on everything that's purchased, I'm the village agent, stuff, well, that means police department. When he's coming in and saying, what, I'm going to get this, this, and this, I said, no, you can't, it's not in your budget, you don't have it. You have to go back and we have to talk to the overseers. And then I'm presented with a bill, pay, I can't present it, so how do I present it? Because you've already used up the money, and my capacity is doing that, So there is a lot of confusion there. What I see myself is I don't mind taking on that responsibility, is that the way that the safety committee used to work, I believe the safety committee should still be in the process of going out and finding people for the lifeguard positions in the police department. I believe that the safety committee should be involved in all that. They usually do. They come to the overseers and they say, hey, we have a policeman for the upcoming year that we want. You guys either vote yes or no. That's, they continue that role. But also, I'm kind of involved with that. I don't have to be the one out there hiring and looking in that. No, I don't want to do that. Leave that up to the committee. But like the day-to-day operations, yes, you do need somebody, because there's a long period of time between overseers meetings, and things have to be decided in a hurry sometimes.
Bill, I don't know if this is how much your time is currently devoted to being a village agent. I don't know if we're talking about adding on another chunk to what you're talking about, or if it's something that fits into what you're already doing.
It kind of fits in with what I'm doing. It may take up a little bit more time, periodically, but it's one of them things. I'm here every day.
Okay.
So I see it.
There's a bunch of hands around, but Steve has been.
So, a couple of things for clarification. In the years I've been involved with the overseers, the village agent has never been the boss. The village agent has no responsibility for office operations. It has never had any responsibility for police. So, I think you want to qualify that comment, right? The village agent has some very clear responsibilities. I think the discussion about how you manage additional personnel is something that's going to take a lot longer than this meeting.
That's fine. We're starting the discussion. We'll first go to Jeff.
But as a village, don't we need someone that functions as the chief executive officer? It seems odd to me that we function as a corporation without a chief executive officer. So as soon as you start to have people who work day in and day out, there needs to be someone on the ground who can manage them. I don't see how it makes sense to think that we can continue to do it with volunteers.
We'll bounce around the table a bit. Let's see, Michael, I think you had your hand up before.
Well, I agree with that, and I think that we're talking about something that's perhaps larger than the safety committee. It's unclear to me the distinction, though, when you drill down into some of this stuff, like Bill saying, I don't want to do hiring, which I understand. It comes down to then who does it, and the committee, and the other thing I think of comparison is, when the tree committee was formed, the tree committee spent some excruciating set of couple meetings on a mission statement, right, which I remember we were even doing phrases, and it was sort of, it seemed to me absurd at the time, but then it made sense, because it helped to distinguish between what the committee's doing, what the tree warden does. It turns out none of this, we don't have that yet, we've been acting. But I think that's important for the committee to, and I don't know, to your point, that we're going to get that in this conversation today, but we are looking at a set of issues here that relate to the mission statement of the committee, and also who does the other parts of it. That, it's unclear. The committee has currently structured the same.
Vicki?
It's not workable.
Yes. Again, this first one is, I think, the most important. I think we've decided that the hiring is one piece, that management, be it an executive officer. I think what I wanted to hear was if we move forward to consider separating these two pieces, which I think is necessary, and the safety committee wants, does Bill feel comfortable managing people? And I'm going into the specifics of, the police officers reported to be outside of the zone that he's supposed to be policing. Would you feel comfortable telling him that you've had this complaint and you're good with that? And then we can move forward and see what that's all going to look like.
Steve?
So Judy and Lee will remember this, the rest of you were involved in this process. Back when it became clear that Bill's dad was not going to continue as village agent, we put a group together and worked on structure for the village. And what evolved out of that is what we have today with Bill as village agent. It also envisioned a point in time where we would have someone like Bill who knew the village intimately and was prepared to step into that role. That model had somebody, and titles aren't terribly important, who was village agent, who would probably work 5 to 10 hours a week year-round. That person was managerial/supervisory and had responsibility for managing the things that Bill does. Now, that does not mean that that person would be reading meters or installing water lines, but they would be coordinating that effort. And I think that's really what you're talking about when you start saying, and to your point, Mike, you're absolutely right, but that's the way that 100 years ago they decided to put run the village. I think you need somebody who has nominal responsibility for managing the village more in the summer months than year-round. I think that could be filled by a broad range of people. I think layering additional responsibilities on Bill, the type we're talking about, to me doesn't make sense. If it was my business and my business alone, I would not do that.
Judy?
I think it's as much a piece of personality as it is time. Bill is managing the village. He's managing the village in a way that frustrates him vis-a-vis the policeman particularly, because he has to say over and over again, that's not right, and then the policeman ignores it. If we're clear and say, Bill's in charge with all our support, then Bill's time is saved, because Bill says, talk to the overseers, and you already got my answer, and if I see something purchased that I didn't authorize, it's going back. So his time is better managed because he is supported by all of us.
We'll get to Mike in a second. I just want to say that this conversation, while I agree that we probably will not resolve this right now, is in fact, I think, a healthy conversation for this board to have, because it gets to the crux of how we're structured and what we expect out of ourselves. Mike?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Judy said. The only snafu I see is the comment we've made a number of times, which is, and Bill Bill said it himself, is that there's a month before the overseers are together again. So if there is some sort of loggerheads between Bill and someone else and he needs support, where does that support come from?
I'm not here all the time, but I'm always available to.
So that would be, so you would understand.
That's who I report to.
Right.
Right.
Right,
I mean-
so then, and then if you need support, you would talk to us, and then. is
Well,
that-
the police officer is an employee of this corporation. We can discuss his employment if it gets to that.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, is in worst case scenario, when things escalate, the normal pathway would be, Bill would be in charge, and then if Bill needs support, he comes to you, and then if you need support, you come to the overseers, and that seems fine.
Well, just as,
Right?
Yeah, well, that's dealing with one aspect of it and very healthily, right? But then what about, let's take another hypothetical. A given year, we are at this point in the year, and we have no lifeguards and/or no police department. And let's, by the way, have a conversation not about the current policeman. Let's just talk about the department. So we would have to look at that hypothetical and say, so who does that? And I think up to now, it's been sort of this ad hoc coming together in the dead of winter safety committee.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not workable, which I've said a million times. But let's look at that hypothetical, because that's different than the one you're exploring.
Right.
That's the one that I think is central, because we get, no one wants to get to June or July, forget that, and have those things not in place.
Right.
I think Jeff was here first.
Well, so I think your point earlier is well taken, using the example of the tree committee. I mean, at a certain point, this is about job description. So what is the job description of the safety committee? And what do we believe the safety committee is empowered to do? Vis-a-vis, what is the job description and responsibilities of an executive officer? It seems to me we have to have an executive officer who's empowered to deal with people on a day-to-day basis. The lifeguard doesn't show up 3 days in a row. We shouldn't have to pull together a committee to talk about it.
Right. And that.
Right. And also, around safety issues, what happens is, throughout the summer, there's feedback about relative safety issues like speeding or the policeman's enforcing of the rules and regulations or the law. So, I mean, there's that piece that's sort of, and that you'd be surprised how much of that goes to certain members of the safety committee in a disproportionate way, and it's
Right.
not.
Gina has asked to
Yeah.
say something.
One person we haven't mentioned, and she isn't here, and she does more work on the safety committee over the course of a year than probably the rest of us put together, and that's Beanie. Beanie is, as a friend of mine once said, too nice for her own good. She is a very willing, hardworking person, and so she does a lot of stuff that we feel now should be done by professional staff. And the hiring process, which we bat down in a way when we have applicants, and we've learned a lot of things. You ask this, don't ask that. But here's what's different in the last couple of years. The economy has indeed improved. A candidate, a person right out of school can get a real job in the real world. And so our parcel of people, either the newbie young kids that nobody else wanted to hire, or the occasional retired cop, they're gone. Bill and I sat at a job fair at Hudson College.
Yeah.
Within the last year, nobody there. Lots of people streaming over to all of the healthcare things. Nobody was looking for a summer job. As for the employees we have lined up for next summer, the safety committee would be happy if they come back. They've said they will come back. They will come back as long as they don't get offered a better job. And then we have, well, the month of March where nobody on the safety committee is in Maine. Other times where Steve Flowers and I are at the last minute doing whatever you can do to get a warm body in here. That's not how it should be. And having, who do you report to? Is it Bill, or is that really adding more to his job? That's not for me to decide. That's not something that.
All right.
Shouldn't be Beanie.
It shouldn't be for me.
Right.
I think, again, I'm going to throw this back, I would like to throw this back to the safety committee and say, how would you like it to be handled? Because I see in January, the safety committee comes and says, we don't have any lifeguards, we need a interviewing committee, or a search committee. And then everybody jumps in and we try to get ourselves in shape as best we can, understanding that the employee pool in this area for any job is very small, and for qualified employees. But I see something like a nominating committee to take, or an interviewing committee, to take that off of your plate if.
See, I don't see, I think you have to be very careful about how committees do and don't work. I mean, I'm in a different place around it. I think it's some combination of what I was hearing Steve say and Jeffrey, I think that at the end of the day, these things it comes down to someone on the hook to do a certain set of things. And when you turn everything into committees, it becomes kind of an unworkable. There's operational issues, and then some of them are handled by committee, obviously, and then some of them just clearly can't.
I'm going to hear from Lee and Judy, and then we're going to start to wrap this up.
Like I've said before, I think the day-to-day operations are going to be properly handled by Billy and John. And I think your next point ought to be to organize the safety committee with a mission statement and what you think the safety committee ought to be doing.
And then we can fill the holes.
And then we'll fill in the holes.
Well, all right, so let me give you a preview of that. The safety committee preview of that is that the safety committee will provide, and I'm sure I can speak to them because we've had these conversations, not the least of which we had a conference call this week of the safety committee in advance of this. And I think it's accurate to say the safety committee will provide oversight and all the words you want to use, but expect that the village will have somebody that manages the day-to-day stuff, and that's not in the safety committee. And I think we can sit down and craft that into a mission statement, but I just want to raise a flag that I think we're actually talking about issues that are larger than the safety committee.
Right. You're talking about personnel.
I agree with that. This has actually been most helpful discussion. And I think that it's going to be...
Could I say something as a walk master?
Please.
It will not be long. But I think the lifeguard scenario is a little bit different. The policeman certainly is, in all the years I've been doing that, which is quite a few, number of lifeguards we've had down there, and something comes up, and I always check in, when I'm down there, check in with them. This came up, and said, well, who's your boss? Who do you report to? Who do you take these issues to? Well, I said, call you, or, I said, oh, okay. So the day-to-day thing is my point of this comment, the emphasis is on is who with the lifeguard. I don't think Billy wants to go all every time the lifeguard has an issue. Spend beanie or me.
Shouldn't be being.
So anyway, I just wanted to throw that into this discussion. I think it's a little bit different than the policeman, and I think we want to be starting to consider the role of volunteers. I hate to see this village growing kind of big mega corporation or business, whatever. But what you are expecting of volunteers, starting as a walk master, et cetera, whether it's enforcement, that's another whole story. But anyway, lifeguard, a little bit different. He or she needs to be able to talk to somebody on a daily basis, and they need to be able to make decisions.
Yeah.
But again, I come back to, I don't disagree with that, but I think we have to be careful that we don't overcomplicate this. I mean, if Billy is the executive officer, and I'm the lifeguard, and I need guidance, in my mind, it makes sense for me to go to the executive officer and say, I don't know what to do with this. Billy might say, well, you should talk to the wharf master, or that's a safety committee thing, but I think we need to encourage village employees to understand that there is a chain of command that involves an executive officer. That's one. The other thing I would say, because I'm here a lot all winter, my wife's here, I will happily serve on the safety committee if it would be helpful to have another overseer involved in the safety committee. I'll volunteer to do that.
Mike?
So, to summarize this a bit, I think, to me, the one hole that we haven't really have any sort of ideas on yet is the hiring.
Yeah.
You guys don't want to do it. Billy clearly has said he doesn't want to do it. An option, and we don't have to decide today, is we could outsource the hiring process. It's a thought, it's a cost.
There are options.
There are options there, and I think, so again, I think what's important is that you get that mission statement, because then when we figure out what the holes are, do we outsource it, or do we find somebody in the village that's willing to do that one little thing to fill that hole, to save us the money and do it internally? You know,
So I think that, I won't say in conclusion, because clearly this is an open discussion, but it sounds, Michael, like you're A, willing to take on, at least temporarily, the chairmanship of this committee, and B, oversee the writing of a mission statement that outlines what the committee expects of itself, and as has been indicated, where are the holes and gaps? So what have we not covered based on your conversations? Judy?
I move that the president, with the advice and consent of the overseers, appoint Michael Terrell as the chair of the safety committee.
Second.
That was a joke. Any discussion?
Well, no.
All in favor? It's unanimous. Michael, thank you very much for taking that on. You'll talk with Jeff about which you guys want to work on that?
And can I just say one thing quickly? We'll have a mission statement in front of this board by the next meeting.
Thank you.
And so can we just commit to this being a discussion we'll have in advance in the next meeting? So
Absolutely.
what the committee is very conscious of and we don't want to have happen is to have this become something that all of a sudden disappears as an issue.
Bring a list of the holes. too.
I would
We're gonna come
actually,
back with what it is and what it isn't.
I would prefer to have that a week or 10 days out so that we could distribute it so that this board could absorb it and
Okay.
it'll make the discussion much more fruitful. Yes, Mike?
and I would suggest you that you get Billy's input about what he would like to do or not like to do at this time. I mean, you can have it sort of two ways, right? This is what we want a village agent to do, and this is what Billy's willing to do.
Yeah.
Because then we can figure it out for the short term and the long term.
Good point. Thank you. Great discussion. Mr. Treasurer, I turn things over to you.
Thank you. So, since we have some new overseers, our process is a little bit different at the beginning of the year. Our financial procedures allow us to pay our bills in December, even though we have no overseers to sign the warrants. So the normal process is we have a warrant, the overseers sign the warrant, that's approval to pay our bills. Since nobody's here, we decided we'd like to pay our bills in spite of that. So the treasurer has been given the authority to process that information and send it out. What you have are warrants that have already been paid. Now, Amy has already filed all that information, and if there's anything in there that you have a question about, Amy can pull from the file for you to take a look at. The general statement about warrants is that you are saying, yep, this is all good, we believe it, you're paying the right amount, you're paying the right people, and you're not sending money where it doesn't belong. I review all of these in their entirety, but I'm not signing off on the warrants. So I'd encourage each of you to just pick 2 or 3 warrants, take a look at the documentation that comes with it, and make sure it jives. You know, real simple to do. The second set coming in there is made up of 2 pieces, actually. The first piece on top, which does not have a separate page, are invoices that are not due until January. So they were separated out so that we don't mix up our financial statements. We have a year-end close. We don't want to be including expenses from 2019 and 2018. The rest of them are the normal ones you'd see. There's one for general government, one for the sewer utility, one for the water utility. So just go through, take a quick look, sign and approve so we can pay our bills.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Relative to the money that we have left over on some of that, did we use all that?
We'll talk about that next.
Oh, you were going to talk about that. Okay.
All right, so I sent everybody information. I get the financial information typically Thursday night before our meeting, and you get varying degrees of response prior to that. So what I did is I sent you a copy of the financial statements with comments. I'm not going to go into those now. If you have questions or anything you'd like to look at, that's great. We can talk about it. And we can also use this as a reference to talk about the other one, which is the treasurer's report, which you all have a copy in front of you. So in general, when we finish the year, we do what we call a first closing. And that's really just saying, okay, we're going to close the books out, we're done. But we're never done because there are errors and things that need to change. And just to walk you through this chart that's on that page, green can generally be considered to be good. Red should generally be considered to be bad. And those are just variances to budget. And what we do is we come up with some estimates of where we're going to finish the year and some corrections we need to make. So just to walk through it quickly, if you look at the very top part, when we look at the various categories of spending, You know, there are things that look horrible. Roads, for example, $10,234 over budget. But there were funds to cover that were approved by the voters that you'll see later in this document. When you look at protection and safety at $4,900 overspent, there were no additional funds to cover that. That was part of the challenge we faced with police this past year. We spent money that was not in the budget. To the best of my knowledge, those funds were never approved by the overseers, so we ended up overspent in a way that came as a surprise to me. Capital expenses and contingencies, once again, it shows that we spent $49,000 charged to that line, but that comes from that bucket of funds approved by the voters that allow us to do a plethora of different infrastructure projects. So when you come down to the bottom, basically, compared to our operating budget, we were overspent by $48,721. The reality is, we had some bonuses coming out of operating income, the amount of $1,100, and other income, the amount of $6,700. So operating income are things like late fees, you know, a variety of just small amounts that end up rolling up into a number that's meaningful. Other income includes things like community hall rental, donations from the community, and a host of other things, which gave us a $7,800 benefit compared to what we had budgeted for. So what that really says is, at this point, we were $40,000 overspent compared to budget. So as we continue, there are some open questions. I think the number is actually higher than that because utilities were billed twice what they should have been billed for rent. So that's going to be a correction that hits general government to the tune of $6,000. Truck maintenance is a $1,525 entry in there. So we split expenses between the utilities and general government for truck maintenance and the truck meter repairs. We did some body work on the truck that cost us a lot of money. There was a reimbursement from MMA for insurance, which went entirely to the general government, and half of that belongs to utilities. So that's what that $1,525 is. When I went through some of the detail, and I'm not done going through detail, like I said, coming in on Thursday night, being here on Sunday doesn't allow a lot of time. We were billed once last year for hydrant rental. So I think there's another $1,700 or so due from general government to utilities that we haven't paid. And Amy, if you've been looking at that, it's the $895 hydrant payments. All we were charged for in the course of the year was the March payment. And then there's the hydrant that's down next to the treatment plant. Our share of that's $49, and we're billed 3 times for that, so that one's right.
Yeah, we'll look at that because we did look at that in the context of the utilities department and we thought we were billing it right, so.
Yeah, so anyway, I mean, I don't have to pay it, but I think the utilities would like that money.
We would love the money.
So
we have a few expenses coming up.
Yeah, so what that would do is say that in total, assuming all this estimated information is reasonably correct, is we're overspent by about $50,000, but the voters approved a carryover of infrastructure funds in the amount of almost $54,000. So at the end of the day, the last number says we've got $3,700 more than we had expected to have at this point in the year if everything had been approved. So that's not bad. Now there are open questions. I don't see expenses for trees that I had expected. We had approved $4,000 of spending that was not been paid. Was that work done or not done?
It's half done. So I don't know if he's billed you or not, but I will check that for the
We
work
have
that was
not
done last
been
year.
billed nor have we paid it. So one of the things we have as an option is if we get that invoice, we can accrue it to last year, which would be my first preference. When the invoice comes in, we'll pay it, life will be good. That will reduce, and that's the lion's share of that $3,700 from what I can see. And if it's only a partial piece that we should be paying for last year, that's fine too. And that will bring us in more or less where we need to be. I don't know what else we missed. We'll go around and go through this process and have a second closing, which embodies all of the corrections that I've indicated here, along with anything else that we find. Dick McElhaney will go through utilities. He may see some things that should have been billed to us or should have been charged differently. We make all those corrections. So does that process make sense, and where we stand right now makes sense to everybody?
Questions for Steve? Steve, thank you so much. It is extremely
Now
helpful.
we're on page 2.
All right, and this is great.
You don't get out of it that easy.
The colors are what makes it work out.
It makes it easier for me. So the other piece is just kind of a kudos to the overseers. Given the magnitude of projects we undertook last year, we did more than I think we did in the 8 years I was an overseer last year, in terms of just infrastructure projects and things that needed to happen. And we were still able to adhere to budget and still book $10,000 to reserves. Wow. So, well done. That's not really an easy thing to do, and I imagine people outside of this group have no idea how difficult that really is. So some old business. We received the town of Northport's contribution of $25,000, so that's in the bank, which is good. New business, so cash flow. We've always used, our tax payable date used to be November 30th, November or something like that, which meant that all year long we borrowed from reserves to fund village operations. We made a change a year or two ago to have that payment due September 1st, and that has really improved our cash flow. And this past year, the most money we ever used from reserves was $66,125. That compares to somewhere between $120,000 to $130,000 in past years. The really implication is that that means we free up about half of that $120,000 to $130,000 that can be used if and when the voters approve it. The overseers decide we'd like to use some reserves, the voters say we agree, that money's available to us. In the past, that wasn't available because we needed it for continuing operations. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is, so we split expenses, and for the most part,
Right, so Mike,
How much is in reserve?
I can look at that. Give me a second. Can I come? Well, it's in the balance sheet.
On the balance sheet.
Oh, okay, we'll get to that.
Yeah, if we, give me just a second, go
Yeah,
through
okay.
this one.
I'm
So,
asking questions.
yeah, no, that's okay. So what we have been doing is we split expenses, and some of those expenses are paid immediately. So we know that Central Maine Power bills are due from the sewer, they're paid from the sewer account. There are expenses where that's harder to do, gas for the truck. So gas from the truck is split quarterly because it's an appropriate way to do it. We have an agreed upon percentage of a split. We have been doing the same thing with payroll for the past couple of years. And we're going to make a change where that is no longer split, but is paid monthly out of the appropriate accounts. That's being changed at the recommendation of our accountants. It's a cleaner way to do it. It doesn't cost us any extra money to do it, but will work much better. The implication, again, for general government is our cash flow position will improve. If you look at the warrants you're signing now, there's about $21,000 being paid from utilities to general government for payroll alone. And what that means is we'll get that money every month to the tune of about $7 grand. So next year, the most we should spend is probably in the range of about $60,000 in reserves. Let's see what else. And then, lastly, next year. So there's some real differences in the coming year, and I thought it would be helpful to highlight those now. So we've always had a contingency budget that we could use as what I call a slot fund, which is just to say we had funds that weren't specifically budgeted for any one purpose that the overseers could use to cover variances in different budget line accounts, or could use it for projects. That still holds true, but that number is $3,000 less than it was last year. So not a bad thing, just something to kind of keep your eyes open for. We have not accrued any funds for reserves. That was a conscious decision to avoid a tax increase. We felt that our reserve balance was healthy and we didn't need to do it. No regrets with that decision, other than to say that in the past, if something went sideways and we could not fund reserves, that wasn't the end of the world. So if we needed $5,000 because the truck absolutely crapped out and we had to do something that was unexpected, we'd only put $5,000 into reserves and put $5,000 against the truck. At the end of the day, it's the same accomplishment, so we no longer have that buffer at all. And the last piece is a protection and safety question, which is that when I took a look at the budgets compared to year-ending spending in a rough sense, most of the budgets we presented to the voters that were approved are very close to what we did this year. So I'm very happy that those numbers will serve us well. The one exception is protection and safety, where we have budgeted $1,800 less than our actual last year. Now, that's not a crisis either. What it means is the overseers can make decisions to do whatever you want to do. Two examples of that would be to say, we don't want to spend more than we spent in the budget, so we're going to restrict hours for lifeguards, police uniforms, whatever you want to get there. The other option to say is that we really want police coverage, and we want more safety coverage, we want more lifeguard coverage. We will spend more money than in the budget for protection and safety, and we'll draw those funds from contingency. So that's an ongoing discussion during the year, and it's a decision for the overseers alone to make.
The price we have to pay based on the job market, the strength of the job market will help inform that.
It does, but I'll give you a real simplistic example. If your lifeguard cost goes up by a little bit, you can cut a few hours out of the season and still come into the budget.
Right.
But those are decisions. They're moving targets. We do this every year. Just thought it would be helpful to have a preview of And that's all I have on that. Judy?
I have a question, and this goes back to the hydrant rental.
Yep.
So you said that we haven't been, the utilities department doesn't appear to have billed the village. And you said, but it has billed for the one down by the water and the sewer, by the sewage treatment. Is that paid by the sewer department?
Part of it is we paid our share.
Okay, is that $49.83?
Yes.
All right.
That's correct.
So I
And
know what to look
we
for.
may have been billed and just messed it up from an accounting standpoint,
Yeah.
didn't pay it. I just want to make sure we were billed, because ultimately, that whole PUC report is what they use for PUC
Exactly.
filings and all that other fun stuff.
Exactly.
Mike, we have roughly $323,782 in reserves. You know, and for purposes of discussion, if this report I just gave you printed out to be exactly correct, and we do have a $3,760 overage, that would roll into reserves, so that number will increase slightly. And you may also recall that we have other projects underway that the voters approved spending to allow us to accomplish those using reserve funds as opposed to raising taxes, most notably the work you're doing with Seawall and the banking in North Street. There was another warrant that approved continuing work on infrastructure projects we did not complete. The only one I'm aware of that is not complete is possibly trees. And that was a total of $4,000, so we may want to pull a couple thousand from reserves to complete that project as approved by the voters. And the budget for that line this year is an additional, I think, $8,500. It was ramped up fairly significantly to allow us to do replacements there. So that's what I know. Any questions? We're in good shape, we really are. And again, kudos to all of you, because it's not easy to get to where we are, and we did it quite nicely.
I want to echo something that Steve said, which is that this board made a conscious decision a couple of years back that we were going to work on implementing significant infrastructure projects here. And we have started moving in that direction and made some great improvements to the village. It will continue, and that we've been able to do it and sort of hold the line has been most impressive. So that is something to be aware of. Here's yours.
And thanks to Bill, because he puts up with endless requests from me with how much have we spent, what's the next estimate, so I have some idea as to where we're going. And he's done a really nice job of staying on top of that and making sure the information coming in from engineers, or Dean Brown, what construction work he does, or chasing Scott down to get information about the wharf. This will be the first year we've budgeted the wharf correctly, if you want to call it that. We've been spending about $14,000 to $15,000 a year trying to get by on a $6,000 budget. So that's finally correct, and that's part of the reason the contingency fund is down, because we've identified where the funds need to be spent and put them in the correct budget. It's been quite the journey.
Jeff, this is...
With a great captain at the helm.
Jeff, this is a blizzard of information for someone who's new to this table, and so this is typically what happens in a treasury report, which doesn't happen, by the way, every month. We sort of move to a more of an interim basis in terms of Steve's feeling the need to report every single month. But are you any particular questions, or?
No, I would say as a newcomer, this was really helpful.
So QuickBooks changed their programming and allowed us to add comments to the document. Before, we had a whole separate box, so you had to kind of pick and choose and find a budget line. Now it's about as straightforward as anything I've seen. And it's helpful to me as well, because I'm trying to keep track of what's going on.
Makes good sense.
Anything else for Steve? Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Page.
Well, I want to thank you guys for being back from your month's vacation. Things went fairly smoothly while you were gone. Not a whole lot happening. I would like to have the, what do you call it, communications person, whatever, reiterate to the people who live in Bayside about what our contractor for trash pickup picks up and what they do not pick up. We've had a big issue with that this winter.
What are the issues been?
Well, they think that we're supposed to be hauling people's leaves. Town of Northport does not accept leaves. Some are thinking we need to haul brush. We just need a refresher on what we pick up and what we don't.
Is there an easy list in terms of the recyclables too for the single stream recycling? Is that I can look at, maybe?
Amy, did you received received a new recycling thing from the town, didn't we?
I can call Barbara and get it.
I think we did.
Yeah.
I think
Okay,
we-
I'll just call Barbara and she'll send it to me.
On the
Might as well say it all at once.
One of the issues is, you know, we've had a lot in the last couple of years, maybe the last 3 years, we've had a lot of people changeover, people buying, selling, you know, so we got a lot of new people coming into the village who don't quite understand the whole process yet. So I just think we need to get that out a little bit more somehow and
Yep.
notices.
Yep. I'll draft it, run it by you, make sure I've captured what you're concerned about.
Because the trash guys haven't, you
No,
know,
it's
keep calling me and saying, hey, you know, am I supposed to take this? And I said, no, you're only supposed to take this, okay.
So how will it go out? Does it go out?
Well, once again, we're eternally grateful for Danny Webster.
Yeah, let's say.
So the first line of communication will be on the website, but it's at the time of year where we're typically stuffing communications into the bills, the next utility bill. So that would be, because a lot of people don't look at BaysideMaine.com.
I know
Not a lot.
we're not on communication right now, just along those lines, if we can have maybe put together a sort of packet for people that rent their cottages and things, because I've had questions asked of me, like, how do I get that new fire ordinance and stuff? So if we had a packet like that.
I think there is a safety brochure that we've already approved.
Nobody's asking for the dog ordinance, because I think the dog ordinance should go in there too.
That's a good one.
And I just printed off a bunch in pink and yellow proposed, so.
So I think, yeah, recycling, any of those should just be in one PDF that anybody asks me, or Dan Webster can have a copy too.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay.
Can I just ask, I don't know.
Yep, go ahead.
Just about that, is there a, can we know what the next mailing, the mailing most adjacent to the start of the season, is that the mailing we should stuff as much into? Because people are starting to think about.
It's going to be the
Well,
March billing.
The March billing,
March
but
billing.
bear in mind that if it's more than the normal postage, we will then have the village contribute to that, because that's, the postage is borne by the utility department. There is a safety brochure that has the revised fire ordinance. There's I think it also references the dog. We'll dust that off and we'll see what the weight is.
So maybe we just have a memo that says all these are available. Talk to Amy and she can email it out. We don't have to.
Well, they can also be
Yeah.
posted at Bayside.Maine.com.
Yeah, so-
Yeah, they are.
They are posted there,
Yeah.
so for more information, just go here.
Okay.
I don't think we need to actually have 6 pieces of paper in there.
Right. And we'll,
And that's, I have received requests through email as to ordinances and stuff, and I've sent them to Bayside, Maine, and told them specifically, this is where you need to go to find them. And they're all right there on the
Thank you.
left-hand side, so.
yeah.
I've been working on some things that we need. Some of it's going to be shared by the 3 business units. A few things will be shared directly by the overseers, by the general government. I need some signs, I need some signage to replace on the dock, things like that. But that's all in my purview, so I don't really need to get into it. So that will be coming up at a later date, for some things we need. Need any ideas or whatever from the overseers on what we should be thinking about for any improvements, things that need to be, and I may need an updated list. What do you call that list? What you got in? Infrastructure list.
That comes out of committee.
We need to start
We'll
looking
work
at
on
that.
that. We'll work on
Yeah.
it. We'll get to that.
I'll get you an updated version
Of whatever you think is.
of the list that I maintain on behalf of infrastructure.
Yeah.
So then you can check off the things that are done and add and enroll.
And we'll get together, Lee.
And then figure out what we need to add that's, new stuff, business stuff, hopefully there's no new stuff. The state electrical inspector came in December to inspect all the wiring, electrical work that was done upstairs. He gave us high praise, said we hired the right company to do that, everything looked good. He said, the only thing that he did say is, this is the first time that this facility has ever got the state permit to do electrical work. impressed that you finally
But you got
You're setting a precedent.
did.
You are setting a precedent here.
Yeah.
State of Maine thanks you.
So we're on their radar list now.
They didn't know we existed
There's
before.
good news there.
Well, he couldn't find the place. He said, "I've never been there before, you know." He finally
You're
found it.
flying under the radar, Lee. He's not happy about this.
So he's okay with that. The two wires that are hanging up by the stage is supposed to have gone up by somewhere. We didn't know exactly where, for in case they ever put future fan in. The electricians did not come back and put that up because they figured that it was getting too cold, and by the time those panels got down and that, they were already on another big projects and whatever. So I don't know where we are on that, for sure. And that bill had already gone, you know, they'd already,
We kind of paid it for it.
it's in that contract.
So we should have-
So I'm gonna, later on when it gets warmer, I'm gonna try to get them to come back. I mean, just drill a couple holes and stick the wire up through all it is.
We're asking for a discount, they don't come back and do it.
Yeah, right. Okay. The other thing, Mike, you were given permission for that basketball improvement plannings or whatever, asphalt.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying to you is, if you would get the person who's going to do that work started on that paperwork process now,
Yeah.
that way we won't have to hold them up when we get closer.
Steve?
I remember that differently. I think that there was there were a couple of proposals as to what we might do. There was one that was recommended as being used when the time came, rather than go back and revisit the whole thing. There have been no funds approved for that project. That can be done, but there's not currently any funds approved.
Right, and as just to remind us, just thanks for bringing that up, Doug. Where we were going with that was we have a donation of both product and a part donation of cash to pay for it. What I'm waiting, I just got in touch with her this week, in fact, to see what the latitude is with the product and when we can. And so she was indicating that, you know, I thought we needed to act by now, but she's saying it can happen later. So I think by the next meeting, I should have an idea of what the cost is. And but I also understood that her structure was changing, so that the paper, I think there was an issue with the paperwork.
Yeah.
Let me follow up with you on that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It's to do with that workman's comp thing, that's all.
Yeah, right. But I think her thing was changing, so she was going to have it in place by the time I'll update you with that.
Well, I was just giving you a heads up, so we
Thank
didn't
you.
wait right up to the last minute, because sometimes they take over a month to get that
Yeah.
process. Other than that, I guess we're, okay.
Two things you wanted to talk about.
Oh, we did have a letter come in on the intent to rebuild the seawall at 2 Auditorium Park.
Field Crow's Nest right behind Duggan's, bottom of the hill, with your parking people that work on parking.
Okay.
They're going to put a seawall in, so we received the notice of intent file. Billy expressed concern that, of course, that seawall abuts our property, which is the bottom of Auditorium Park, so we'll need to coordinate with them. I guess what we wanted to do is have Billy contact these people, point out that we own that land and to the side.
I just think that we need to cover ourselves in case they all of a sudden decide to stop back and wheel the trucks down Auditorium Park and dumping over that bank.
Right.
Because that could affect our banking tremendously.
They can't go there.
Well, I know, but they don't know that.
We don't have a wall there, right?
So do you want Billy to communicate or John to communicate with these people? or-
Unfortunately, we have bamboo there.
I'm happy to communicate, but I would want clarification as to what I've communicated.
Right, okay.
So you two will work through.
Thank you.
Yes.
Billy
And then-
handed it to me because it was certified.
And then there's the,
Yeah, but I signed it.
there's the Ann Suave piece also.
Well, that's the other piece, the Suave, Anne Suave wrote to, I guess, how did we get that, Amy? Did we all see that email from you?
She sent it to the village and then
And
I
you sent it to
expressed
all of
it
us.
to you
So
guys.
you all saw that email from Anne. She's the woman who has the cottage in the little Marathon Square Park, the sweet little park.
36 for all.
Yeah, the one sitting right on the road, they want to put a foundation under, so they would need to lift their house, move it, have it sit in the park for a little while. We usually give permission to let people do that once they sign an indemnification agreement for any damage they may cause to the park. I call it the Casnionis agreement. But Billy made a very good point that we, and I would endorse it, and I'd say there's a motion that we grant her, the permission she's seeking, provided she provide the customary indemnification agreement and confirmation as to the locations of her boundaries. Billy's concerned that the cottage in and of itself may be in that park, and we don't want more park land being lost. So I believe so that's a motion that we ask her to confirm her boundaries as a component of this by way of a survey. I believe that the pond property, Sue's property has a survey, so I don't think it'll be imposing a huge hardship on Anne.
Right, they just want to protect it's close.
Well, this is in, yeah,
Where we put the hydrant, fire hydrant this fall.
The one across from the
This
school.
week.
The
This
park is
week.
in Merrithew Park.
The one that has all the driftwood things in
Yeah.
front of it?
Yeah.
That would be
The
the
sweet
one.
little,
Oh,
so there's
that
the 3 houses, there's the Butter's house, which is falling down because they're not occupied. She's next to the Butter's house, right on the corner of she's right on Broadway. So she's right here.
And
She's
she
got
wants to move her place.
temporarily, she wants to put a foundation in, so she wants permission to store the cottage in the middle of the park while she's doing that, which is something whenever people are doing.
I just want to say though, do we put a time frame around this, that it has to be done between this time? Because, summer people come there.
No, I
Exactly.
explained to her that it would have to be a fall issue.
Oh, it's
She's-
fall
she's-
issue.
I
think her letter.
She talked about she didn't know it would be next year. It might be-
Right.
Oh,
She's
that's
pursuing-
right,
She's
that's
looking
right.
for
It's
it
all
down
coming
the
back to me,
road.
yes, thank you.
So we would, so my motion is that we give her the permission to do that, provided that we get confirmation of her boundaries, that she's provide us the customary easement that everyone has, or indemnification agreement, and we do the customary timelines that this can't be during summer season.
Second it. Second by Lee. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. Did you get the full language on that, Amy?
Pretty much.
There was a lot in there, that's your.
And so, Amy, that easement's a little different from the seawall easement, so you and I will just work on making sure we get it the right way.
Okay.
And she will have a few things on the utility side that she'll have to do too.
Can I just say, this is one of these things that comes up pretty regularly. Is the procedure and what we require written down anywhere so that, should you fall off the face of the earth, God forbid,
3 years.
Somebody can easily go and say, look at these are our checkpoints?
Yeah, it's actually Billy and Amy who are really doing this. Amy's been drafting lately by.
Protocol 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
They're pretty well-greased machine here at this point.
Oil.
I just, one comment that Bill raised, spending authorizations. Neither John nor I have any authority to spend any money on anything. The overseers control all spending within the village, with the notable exception that Bill can spend up to $500 on his own merit. Now, that is not intended to be $500 10 times a year.
Right.
It really was just to say, we don't want to hold his hands on small projects that need to get done, let him go forward and do it. On the utility side, I think we raised Dick to $1,000.
He said on
I
Friday.
thought it
$1,500.
was 2,000.
I said 2,000.
Might be 2,000. So it's a little bit different. The expenses are likely to be higher, but that is a limit of Dick's spending authority as well. He can spend that $2,000 or something should come up that needs to be dealt with. The intent is always to present it to the overseers or the board of trustees for the utilities or possible.
We did do a thing last year with upping my credit card to 15.
Right.
Because of the way it gets paid, and if I need to buy something, I can't buy it.
Yeah, but that's different than the authorization. So Bill will oftentimes use a village credit card to pay for, say, truck repairs that exceed that $500, but that was approved by the overseers. That's just a mechanism to pay the bill. But Bill's ability to spend money on his own is limited to $500.
Vicki, did you have a point?
Well, you did mention briefly something about signs for the dog comes into this discussion. discussion, but then on an aside said, you know, you had permission to go ahead and buy those.
Because they're
But-
under $500.
Right, but you report back to us that, you know, I bought these signs. It's just a question, we're replacing signs that were stolen?
The waves washed them off the side of the dock.
Yes, by nature.
No fishing on the swim float, no boats under the dock, those things. You know, it's maintenance issue, so it's basically a dock maintenance.
Yeah. But you report back to us and say, oh, these have been purchased and those, you know.
Yeah, I just threw it out there as coming up with.
Anything else for the village agent? How are we doing in terms of winter storms thus far?
A lot.
Dots.
I wish we'd just get snow. You know, we'll get 2 inches or more snow, 3 inches, 4 inches of snow. I gotta get out plow it, of course, and then while I'm out there plowing it, getting rid of it, then it changes over to mix. And then it will turn over to rain and freeze, and so there's been a lot of sand.
Thank you, you've done a really good job on
It
this.
seems.
We're not here really to
If you do my
No,
driveway,
no.
you
I
could
mean, I
just
was-
pull in and turn around in my driveway, drop a little sand.
There is an issue on C Street, the same issue that we've had for
I
a
saw
lot of
that.
years.
I saw that.
That's a town issue, of course. I'm involved with it a little bit with the town. He is supposed to have come today, possibly or tomorrow. We're gonna try to lay straight salt out on that to get that water to get back over into that sluice way. 'Cause this warming up and then freezing that night, it freezes, pushes the water out a little bit, warms up, melts, runs out, freezes, so it's pushing the water back across the street.
Yeah.
He was being too kind.
We
Yeah.
just hunkered
He
down.
told them that they needed a deeper trench because of this concern, and they didn't do it, and that's why we still have an issue.
Right.
Let's just cut to the chase.
And one of the issues is the water that comes down that we put out onto that road there too. And hopefully, we've got that addressed with, to finish up Oak Street. We're gonna reroute that water over to that catch basin itself.
Wow.
Directly instead of where it goes now.
Yeah, we are adding something to that, but that's not the issue. The issue is coming down Maple around the corner.
Yeah,
All the way
yeah.
down.
So we're still getting a little problem in the Maple Street, I'm noticing. The water's not falling on the side of the road and going into the catch basin, it's coming down the road now and going over this way, and then if it misses that last catch basin going by.
That's late plans.
And I think it's all to do with the frost and just the, you know, it's,
Are people complaining?
no, it's just something that I'm seeing.
Yeah,
Jeff
see, on
complained
C
to me
Street,
about
it's pretty nice.
Jeff complained to me about it.
I did.
It's just, it's an issue that we're
Well,
watching.
stay off of C Street.
Exactly.
Well, now I know, particularly when there's snow, you can't see it.
I
The problem is his dogs are too big, they pull him around.
I believe everything is working fine on our streets, with the exception of the ongoing problem that we got with the 2 trees at the end of Pleasant Street. And we have an issue that we got to look at with the water coming down Broadway and going down Pleasant Lane, down the little alleyway down and back. And where does that water go? It's going underneath and causing a problem for somebody down below.
Yeah, I have a
There's
question.
no good solution there because there's no place to send the water.
I have a question for the overseers with respect to that. We can do it either at the infrastructure.
Do it now.
Okay. Billy plows that.
No,
Okay.
The lower part.
The lower-
Pleasant Lane.
Pleasant Lane. Pleasant Lane is not a road.
Right.
Pleasant Lane is a walkway. And he's having issues plowing. And the question I have is, do we plow, or do we have an agreement to plow, an obligation to plow? That's just a question for everybody. I don't have an opinion either way. It
Judy?
just seems like we shouldn't be plowing cartels.
I think the only reason we're plowing it is, Billy, is because you found it easier to approach the year-round residents by going down that road than going down the principal road and then backing up. So the decision to plow that lane is driven by the fact that we have to plow for year-round residents, and he's determined that's the safest way to do it. I would like the Pleasant Lane problem to be solved, even though it's not easily solved, because the variance between one piece of, for walking, it's extraordinarily dangerous. Imagine, it's not a safe place.
So we have to plow for year-round residents no matter what.
Yes.
So if the people that built this wall at 2, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And at the end of Auditorium Park, retire here, move here from New Jersey. We've got to plow that Auditorium Park because it is a disaster. We cannot do that. It's not safe. We have to rebuild the whole park. Because right now, and Billy brought up a very good point, it's not us that it's going to be a problem. It's going to be the person who goes down there to look at the water that doesn't know what they're doing. When that turns into ice, you would just keep going and you go right off the side and down into the ocean.
You are correct that when a village that was built for summer occupancy is transformed into year-round, there are challenges. We cannot tell people they can't transform their properties into year-round. So we have to address the realities of that.
I mean, that's the reality we had when we all of a sudden had to do it for Lower Clinton Street and North Street. Same, because we never used to have to do that years ago. And now that you got some people living in that, you have to, you know. So it needs to be on the infrastructure's radar
Well, that's what I'm asking.
for future,
Okay.
is we got to think about those things, because that is going to be a problem when that happens at the end of that hill, because there's no barriers, there's no nothing.
Right, so then there's a balance of that.
And
We
then
have to do
there-
Pleasant Lane if we have to do that, so we can look at that at the
You
time.
got, you know, it's
It
infrastructure.
was just a question.
Ongoing
I don't want to
process.
spend more time.
Got it.
Thanks.
Report of the office manager. Amy?
One thing that I did want to let you guys know, I received an email from Samantha, which is in charge of Bayside Farmers Market. She is deciding not to continue managing the Bayside Market next year. And she said that she's notified the vendors that she had for 2018. No one has stepped forward to manage the market for next year. But she said, thanks for your support, for supporting the market, and she wanted to make us aware. So that was really the only thing that.
Does that mean no more market?
Right.
Well,
No more ice cream? Yeah.
No more ice cream?
Ah, this is outrageous.
No, it means she's not managing it. It may be that someone else steps forward to manage it. It's not her.
Gordon, are you volunteering for the
I
ice cream?
volunteered to sample it.
They seem to be pretty self-sufficient as a group. It doesn't seem like it would take an enormous amount of work. I'm not saying that anyone in this room should do it, but putting up a few signs and making sure it all happens and gathering the insurance and that, it's like once it was going, they just kind of moved in and did it.
Did they get a lot of business? I never got there till after 5 o'clock.
I think that's a big issue.
I think
Yeah.
They never got a lot of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I always saw them sort of, okay, question.
Anything else, Amy?
The only other thing I did want to ask is, I know last fall I was looking into more room for our files because we have kind of maximized all of our space and with all the paperwork and everything that we hold on to. And I checked with Beverly to see what historical items that she was looking for, and a lot of what I talked to her about she wanted to keep. So I didn't know if it would be okay if we were to scan the paperwork and put it on a USB.
Which paperwork are you referring to?
Monthly paperwork, I mean, deposits, all of our invoices, the
Everything that we
payroll
generate.
information, all the stuff that we keep on a yearly basis.
Didn't we make a policy in terms of destruction, a 7-year hold on, permanent hold on all minutes, and a 7-year policy that said you could destroy deposit slips that are more than 7 years old, etc. My understanding is that the only corporate records we need to keep physically are the minutes of each of the governing bodies. The rest was a 7-year, just because that's the statute of limitations on it.
We did receive a thing from Maine Municipal Water Association that a chart on what things you had to keep so many years, what things you could get rid of, what things you had to hang on to for life. I don't know if you were here then.
Yeah, I mean, I have that, and I was going by that, but then you had said, well,
Well, some
you
things,
should check with the historical society.
right, some
to
things
see.
she likes to take out.
And
just
I
as
was
an
checking,
historical.
and everything that I checked with her, they wanted to keep.
Yeah, we should act consistent with the policy that the overseers adopted. We could, maybe it would be a good idea to remind ourselves what it is we adopted, and if we can refine that, narrow it to solve the pressures, then we should do that, because otherwise there's a fiscal result in keeping more than we have room for.
And I'm not sure the historical society is the one that makes that decision.
Right.
I'm quite sure they're not. And especially when we're talking about invoices from 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So if we were to move to roughly a 7-year policy in terms of getting rid of materials except for meeting minutes, I would think, would that take
That
away?
that would take a huge, make up all kinds of space if we got stuff back to.
Steve?
So since we brought on the accounting firm in Portland, everything financial is scanned and maintained in the cloud. Now, one document I can think of we would probably want to keep would be the signed warrant, but I don't think we will, and I'm not suggesting we get rid of it, I'm saying that going forward, we may not need to keep paper copies of invoices and things for more than maybe 2 years,
Right.
because we will have longer-term records
Right.
stored with our accounting firm.
When we made the policy, it was before we all were so skillful at PDF docs and just putting stuff up there. So we should look at that again.
Can you just give me a sense as to what you've got for financial stuff, and I'll try to puzzle through what the accounts have and get back to it? Because I bet you have stuff from forever ago.
Yeah, I've got stuff back in the 1900s, so.
So there may be some historical value if it's truly old, and I would understand that. I would say that if there is material that the Historical Society deems significant, then the Historical Society should take the responsibility.
Yeah, I don't, with all due respect to Amy, I am confident that Beverly wasn't directing Amy not to do these things. I think she was sharing her opinion.
Right. But if there's an invoice from 1915, there might be value in hanging on to it in that office, not in this one.
Right, but remember, in terms of the history of this organization, what you're saying is old. In 100 years, 2018 will be old too, and someone may think this has been visiting. So we should, but if we have the ability to retrieve that material digitally, we should.
Right.
So Beverly seeks out that information actively, and on the financial side, it's primarily our annual meeting notes, the annual report of the town of Northport, and our audits.
Right.
Just along the lines of compliance there, I'm sure in that NMHR it talks about emails from the staff and really from us that come through the channels. They're supposed to be kept for a certain number of years, and I don't think that Gmail counts because we can't control that. So there should be some sort of archiving that somebody should look at for the future.
That's something that absolutely can be brought to a USB drive. You can just, if you want to, take and say, here's the 2017 emails.
Well, we don't print the emails.
Email print, so that's easy to store.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that just needs to be done formally, because if anybody ever filed a FOIA for us, right?
Right.
We should be able to have that information available.
So I would say that in that regard, that in terms of old emails, you could do them manually, just put one or each.
And is it USB or the cloud? 'Cause-
That's what I would recommend.
Yeah.
Well,
The cloud.
Yeah.
I really both, because just because it's sitting in Amazon's cloud doesn't mean it's going to be there in 10 years. So-
Exactly.
So I would have a backup of USB.
My suggestion would be, because we looked at this, is that from a legal standpoint, it's not supposed to be just the ones you save. It's supposed to be every email that comes in, even spam and everything. So someone could claim they have all the stuff, right? In a true discovery. So it's easier if you just have it all bounce from the cloud somewhere that goes through something that just saves it, and it's a nominal fee every year, and then they come to you, and then you don't have to do anything with yours, because they're already being saved elsewhere.
But if we expand our storage with Google, don't we go to the same place? Because that's all cloud-based.
I don't, the people we looked at said you didn't want to use Google because they control it. And you wanted to take the Google emails send it to your own thing that then saves it and then that bounces it back. Now, I don't know if that's, what are your thoughts there?
My thought is that this is all a healthy discussion that doesn't need to be taking up the overseer's time. I think we start with what is our existing policy, and then we come up with a plan for going beyond it. Sorry to be short.
Committee reports, tree planting, tree warden. Ms. Matthews.
Nothing really to report. The tree was taken down in, whatever that is, where the boats are stored. Cradle Road, thank you. I always think blank on that. Pending, I did talk to our current arborist, and they're finishing up a job in Cushing, and they hope to do the tree on Pleasant Lane, and hopefully the pruning as soon as that job's done and the weather changes. That's when we were getting all that mess. So I drove by today. It's like tomorrow's a perfect day to do it. So hopefully. And also the tree on Pleasant Lane, they're going to more than willing to chop up so Amy can take the little stumps over to Drinkwater School. So he's been really, really nice and willing to communicate. Just, the weather didn't cooperate and they're really busy.
Bill?
One question, the wood that was, the birch that was cut on the end of Cradle Road there, if that wood doesn't disappear by summertime, how do we get rid of it?
I'll talk to him about it. I think he'll take it, yeah.
Because I don't believe that's going to disappear.
No, okay, yeah, I'll ask him.
Wood for summertime? We got a bonfire in July.
Well, do you want
That
to?
has until July.
If you want to go take a look at the stumps, the pieces on Cradle Road, see if that's what you want, let me know, and we'll just leave it there, and you'll take take responsibility.
It won't be until July.
That's all right. It's just,
People that live there might.
My thought,
You asked Eddie Lloyd, I'll put a free sign up.
I've asked Eddie Lloyd, and I've told several, the people that I normally tell about wood that's free around,
Yeah.
I've told,
At the dump?
I haven't seen Drexel to tell him. Yeah.
yeah, it's there. If it
All right,
disappears,
it can
that's fine.
disappear, somebody
If
there.
it's- If it's not and it doesn't disappear, I won't say anything until you let me know if it's still there, you want to use it in July. I don't think the people living there are really going to say too much. I don't know where it is.
We'll get rid of it as soon as
There's some birch there that's usable, but most of it's just garbage, not really worth burning, because it's so rotten.
Anything else?
No, the tree committee oven is disbanded basically. For the winter, my plan for the summer is after these two other planned tree pruning and removal are done, we start talking about fulfilling the obligations of the ordinance and where to plant them. But that comes along with updating the ordinance. So that's what the tree committee will be working on. If anybody has any input, and also when we talk about planting trees, if anybody has any input as to where they would like a tree or where they see the infrastructure committee, we'll pass that by the infrastructure committee if we come up with places and things like that. I have identified a few places where we can actually get free trees. So free is always good, although they might be small. And so that's where we are in the general mix of things.
Thank you. Communications committee?
Nothing to report, except that I will follow through on Billy's request, and the big comments be only about the ordinance being publicly available.
And finance committee?
Can I just jump
Sorry,
in?
go ahead.
Moved quickly around that email and storage issue and communication, and probably not, but I just wanted to bring up one thing. Can we just have a little brief conversation about the practices and protocols about sharing information as board members? And to be clear, I sent out an email that characterized some of the safety committee issues. A board member wrote back to me to say that they were deleting that email because of, in keeping with the open meeting law and not doing business via email. I understood that, but that's not, there's a distinction, I think, between doing business via email, which is not transparent and would violate an open meeting, and updates and sharing.
Right, I would
So
agree.
I think one is a communication function, the other is clearly not allowed. I just want to have us all be clear about that, because I do want to be able to update by email without it being something that, is misinterpreted.
Right, it's very important, and I'm glad that you're asking it again, that we not act as a board via email. We cannot do that. We can't solicit action, we can't recommend action, but it is essential for us to be efficient and not have 4-hour meetings, to put the communication in front of one another so that we can think about it. Just like what John said earlier, it'd be great if we had your mission statement 10 days so we can think about it, but it would be absolutely wrong to say, well, Michael, I disagree with ABC. You disagree or you agree, save it for the meeting. You have a question like, there seems to be a typo on page 3, that's a fair question. So I hope that we're all clear to that. And also as to that, it is essential that, because we all have busy lives, that the way to assure that your document, whether it is a communication as to information or a agenda item, that it be, and you copy NBC name at Gmail, so that you have no personal responsibility for answering that FOIA request. Any and all emails Ray this. So you and Mike, you talk to one another about something, CC Amy. Amy's the person who's responsible for responding to those public access requests.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's clear, and I just, because I know having served on boards and continue to do so with open meeting law and digital communications, I think the distinction is updates and communication versus debate and deliberation, and that's, you know,
Exactly.
And I think that we've moved in a good way past that. I think earlier, 6-12 months ago, we had some issues with that, and I think we're in a good place now on that. So thank you for bringing that up. I agree. Finance Committee.
The only question I have, Steve, isn't it time for us to do our annual warrant? All the bills can be paid, the CMP, the regular old bills?
That was all put into an ongoing policy document,
Okay,
so that we didn't have to do it every year.
okay.
So what Judy's referring to is, for a number of years, overseers reapproved what Judy just spoke about. There are some bills, like Central Maine Power, that direct debit, that's just the way it is. And then the December warrants that we talked about earlier, and every year we renewed that authorization and finally just said, let's put it into a village policy.
I remember it being a January discussion. I'm sorry, I don't
Yeah,
remember.
no, you're right.
A year ago, we approved
Okay.
that. Governance Committee, Ms. Metcalf.
Y'all should have the overworked, but not substantially changed, zoning ordinance. We had our final public hearing on this on November 18th at the conclusion of the last overseers meeting. We had one member of the public come. I believe that we answered all her questions. At the same time, the town had also reviewed this and posed questions and caught a mistake that we had in here. You'll recall that one of the things we wanted to change was to assure that that the CEO was expressed as an employee of the town and not of ours, and we still had it expressing village. So we made that final cleanup. We've sent it off to the town. I have no further comments. So with that, I'll take a motion that the zoning ordinance of the Northport Village Corporation as amended through and as a consequence of the public hearings that occurred on September 2nd and November 18th of 2018 be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you.
Oh, so
Thank
just-
you very much, Judy, for shepherding that through. It's been a while.
Well, and then the next
And this
step
is
is
part
to recall, right, so I will be working on a survey to, remember we talked about now saying to people, what do you want your village to look like? What type of control do you want? That survey, those survey questions I'll be working on, and I'll be asking you all to comment on them at the next meeting. And then we'll get that out there in February.
Yeah, this one though was very important to get on the same page with the town, so it's great that that's all done now.
and just for clarification, isn't there then a May and June process that
Right. First we'll do the survey, then we'll have a public meeting with the same question, whether or not people answer the survey. What do you want? What do you want your town to look like? What degree of control do you want the government to have to help you accomplish that vision? As I've said, the debate is you want no control, remembering that some zoning is for safety and fire protection and all that, do we want architectural review boards that I knew I'd get a shake of the head. Those are the extremes that we're crossing our transom as we've had this conversation in the first instance, and our conclusion on the governance committee was we don't want that to be a top-down conversation. If there's enthusiasm in the village for further control, let's hear it before we start drafting things about further control.
Or just changes in this in general. This was just the cleaning up changes.
So you'll see survey questions for February that will go on BaysideMaine.com, theoretically also in the utility bill, but there will be the public hearings if there are changes that people want.
So is it the hope that at the annual meeting in August, there would be a new version for the voters then to approve?
I do have one question, which is, because we do this in concert with the town, if you had some sort of a review board, would that review board be run by the village or the town or a hybrid? How would that work?
The CEO is employed by the town, but has to act consistent with our ordinance. The Board of Appeals is appointed by the town, but the ordinance requires that they be village residents, because of course the law requires that anyone who sits on a zoning ordinance live in the community that they are regulating.
Okay.
So there's supposed to be only people from the town sitting on the Board of Appeals, from the village sitting on the Board of Appeals. Like Jeffrey would qualify now that he's a year-round resident. We'll put him on that too.
Sorry. Sorry about that.
Nice one.
Anything else, Judy?
No, well, I guess Mike has talked about the ad hoc committee with regard to waterfront safety. To the extent the governance committee needs to play any type of role there, I'm happy to do it. We had a meeting on Wednesday about those ideas, and Mike's going to be reporting, or Mike or Jeffrey's going to be reporting on that.
Infrastructure Committee, Mr. Lannon?
Yeah, I'll do the initial and then I'll let Jeff talk about that. So obviously we already did the review of the Nordic Farms, with the folks that were here. I mean, we're just tracking that. It really will be a long process probably, so it's not something that can be resolved quickly. The seawall, I have been negotiating the design contract with them. The input I keep getting from people is that we really do want to consider the two options, right? So that's where we left it, remember?
Do you want to just
You want me to
review?
review?
Yeah, one is the revetment and one is the granite wall. Those two
The
options.
revetment option is the one that's currently approved.
Right.
And is the one that we approved for the design of the wall.
Correct.
Since then, there have been a lot of people that do not like that option as much as a vertical wall option, okay? We looked at the vertical wall options, and where we came down at the end of the last meeting was that because we will have to do some sort of holding back of the seawater, which is an expensive proposition, that anything we do should be somewhat of a long-term solution because of that added construction cost. So we are interested in really the granite wall option. So the granite wall option does require some engineering that's outside of the revetment. However, in further discussions, that would also be helpful. We need to do some geotechnical work to make sure that the wall will hold itself up. Okay? Go ahead, Lee.
Can't we just we'll pick a contractor, we refer it to him, and they'll take care of it all? Why do we have to keep going back to engineering with this? Because they can do it. They're bond.
We have not signed a contract with...
Have you looked into what any of these contractors would do it for?
So you're talking about design build
Yeah.
type thing?
Yeah.
That's a totally different approach from where we've been over the last...
Well, I think that's the approach that makes a whole lot of sense and a lot less expensive.
Okay, I'm willing to have that discussion here, and I mean, I think we all...
I think the last meeting we were at, that's when I kind of leaned over to you and I said, are you going to check that out? And you said yes.
Well, I mean, check it out in the sense that it is definitely an option. What I've been tasked to do is to satisfy the article that we talked about, which was to get a design for the revetment. That was technically what we were assigned to do. I asked them for that design with the design of a full wall, and of course that was outside of our budget, as you would expect. I have since gone back and said, well, what we really need is we need to have them both far enough along that the price is real, and then we can go back to the overseers at this next meeting and say, this is the cost of the revetment, this is the cost of this one. You know, these are real costs. I said, you know, plus or minus 20% would be, that's really, the 20% is for issues we find in the process, not design issues. And then at that point, obviously the revetment is going to be less than this one. The village could then decide at the annual meeting, because we're not going to build until 2020. This other option has not been on my plate, other than we just kicked it around. If we want to formally...
I make a motion that we formally go with looking at contractors and get an estimate from a contractor, what they'll do it for, the granite wall.
I'll second so that we can continue conversation.
So now we're in discussion now on that motion, Steve.
Somebody has to second it.
That's
she
why I
just did,
seconded
she
so
just
that we
did.
could.
My gut tells me that the voters would approve granite wall, regardless of cost.
That's where this is going.
And I wonder if that is a foregone conclusion, what is the best way to proceed from here? You're right about your charge, but does that now mean that we accomplish that by working on a design build approach? Or does that mean we work on it by continuing to engineer? And that answer I do not have.
Can I just ask for clarification, when you're talking about granite wall, basically what's there now redone?
Well,
Or
right now,
not?
there's no granite at this particular piece of it. It would be changing the wood wall, with all those vertical into a granite wall, which would, yes, be aesthetically a continuation of the causeway. And so the parking would, theoretically, it would not take the parking, theoretically, it would not take any of the beach, because the footprint would be essentially the same. And the cost.
So I am in a quandary now, because technically the revetment is what we approved. Now, we could do this a couple of ways, right? We could stop that process, tell the engineering company, forget about that for a minute, and go and do what Lee's talking about now. We could do what Lee's talking about, continue with that, expend the funds on the revetment and the granite wall. These are all options.
Just describing it, this is good, please.
He can shake his head.
You can shake his head. I'm just saying, I'm just describing. And then we could go to the meeting with all these options, but we would have spent this money, you know, up to $25,000 on these options.
Well, I hate to waste money.
Really? I didn't know that.
Are you finished there? I'm, you know,
Yes.
it's hard to follow.
Right, and the last option is that we could be more in line with exactly what was the charge, which was do the revetment with 4 options for different circles, and then add in some of this granite wall with whatever remaining budget is left. Those are the 3 options. So,
I don't understand add in this remaining granite wall.
because right now, if you read the article, it was to get the final design and final costs, and have another meeting in the fall to go over how we're going to rearrange the circle with respect to the revetment option. That's really the charge.
Here, didn't say all of that, but it may have been undertakings of the article.
All the things that we've
Didn't
discussed.
say anything about a granite wall.
Right.
Sure
Right,
that.
it authorized $25,000 to take the next step.
Right.
He's checking for sure.
And my hand's up only because Billy's was up and I wanted to hear what he wanted to
Well, all I
say.
wanted to do is, I had a conversation with you 2 different times, and what Lee is saying, didn't you tell me that you went to Proctor Marine and one of those other guys to ask them about a cost to do something, and they said they did not want to give you a cost for that because that will ruin their chances if you ever do something, you already got their figures, and
Well, yes, that's true. If I went to them, like I did, and said, give me your cost, here's some money to do a cost option, they thought that would preclude them from bidding on it.
Right.
But if we were to go and get bids, actual bids from people, and then we said that we're going to recommend this to the overseers in August as an option, I didn't say it that way to them.
Right, okay.
Well, that's what I think you ought to do.
That was what I understand your motion.
That's what it is.
And the
I
design,
just didn't understand.
Wait, hold on a second. Peggy?
I just don't want to be too quick to say that the voters would be in favor of a granite wall that would be many times, not just twice as much as a revetment. I don't want to assume too much here. I just want to put that out there.
you're absolutely right. When this price tag is attached to it, their aesthetic sense may be altered.
Judy?
Does the design build option have restrictions for us in terms of permitting? Because we have to do permitting here, and my understanding is that the engineers help with the permitting.
The engineers will help with the permitting. Some of these, like Pratt Marine will help with permitting too. They've given me estimates that include permitting.
Okay, that's,
So they can do that to some extent. They will have to get together with an engineering firm for plans that are stamped, that are for permitting purposes, not for construction. And then they would bond the project to ensure it, is the approach that he's.
as long as I didn't want to say, yeah, let's do this design build, only find that Pratt says, we can't do permitting.
Steve?
Yeah, so when we went into the annual meeting, the thought was that the revetment would be an acceptable option to the voters. And I'm not sure that that's true or untrue. The way that the article was written was to see if the village corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to withdraw from reserves to fund consulting and engineering studies for the repair of the seawall. Withdrawal not to exceed $25,000.
So it
So
didn't
that-
bind us to the
That
vote.
leaves it open, so.
Well,
that
I think it leaves us, yeah, I think it leaves us in a gray area, but I don't think it's a bad gray area.
No.
And I guess, so if I had to go home and ask my wife, which I was gonna do, if I could figure out a way to be able to give her a number that said, we can do a granite wall, and it's gonna cost us X, we can do this other thing, and it's gonna cost us Y, is there a path like that we can approach? And sort of get the best of both worlds to be able to say,
That's what I was doing.
okay.
But that's
So
not.
that's my question, because we haven't,
I was rejigging that money. We were not going to get, originally the intent was, and again, this was the intent based on our meetings, not what that article says. But the intent was to get a full design permit package, soup to nuts, for the revetment option, that says this is what it's gonna cost. The only variable is, what is the circle gonna look like? And we were gonna discuss that in an open meeting format like we did before upstairs in the summertime, and then that would be decided. That was the original.
Is it just the circle, or wasn't it also, or does that assume parking? Wasn't there
Well,
an
how-
age-
Right, but how it's
Yeah,
configured.
how that
How it's
wall would be
configured.
There were
Not
four-
not the look of the circle, as much as the impact of that functionality of that whole area.
Yeah, that's what I mean by that.
Right.
So the circle would, we would still have the circle. We have certain things we need to do. We need to have access to the chemical building for the wastewater treatment plant. We have to get the floats in and out. We have to allow boat access. We have to have, allow access around that a truck can get around there because of the.
And also, you're digging back into the hill, so you're gonna have another wall in there.
They said that there was ways to regrade that.
Vicki,
No, I remember from that meeting when the people came and gave that presentation early in the summer that nobody, except a handful of people went to because they weren't here. There was a price tag attached to the granite wall, and there were 4 options and there were price tags attached to all of them. It didn't necessarily include the geo-testing or whatever that was.
Geotechnical.
Yeah, do you remember what the price tag was for the revetment?
I do not have the prices on this.
Okay.
And they also, as I understand, the further report from Mike was that they retreated from those numbers pretty quickly. They said, oh, it sounds to us like people thought those were numbers we could rely upon, we want to make clear that I remembered about 500,000 for the granite, and they went, oh, it's going to be more.
And once And once the people in the village find out they're no longer gonna have a beach because of the revetment.
Well, now we're making assumptions.
No assumption. The only reason we have a beach is because it's scouring out between our wharf and the area down below.
There's been mixed reviews on that. I think that's definitely one of the schools of thought. The other schools of thought is that it comes and goes and moves more like a natural seashore where sometimes it adds, sometimes it subtracts, and we don't know what would happen.
Actually, we had a question or a comment from someone in the audience.
Yeah, I was one of those handful of people that took my time to attend that meeting where a lot of things were presented. And I kind of resent the fact that after you asked for the input and then we all voted and gave a recommendation, and it was not just a matter of money. We were concerned, we were asking engineers questions with all the changes in storms and climate change and the cost, long-term costs. These decisions weren't made particularly on the aesthetics, because I think if I were just looking at aesthetics, would not vote for that. Yeah, the granite made a lot of sense. I think that it feels like you guys are now ignoring the recommendations of what happened when you asked for the community input. Maybe it wasn't as many people, but it was the people who gave a shit and came to it that made the things. And now I'm hearing that you're doing something completely different from what was the whole purpose of that meeting, and I feel a little annoyed by that.
For the record, it was not a handful of people. There were probably 30.
Yeah, I was there. I'm
Right,
saying.
you were there, right.
Okay.
And just for the record, I just didn't want really people watching this to think that it was like 4 people there. There were 30, there were dozens of people there.
And by the way, Steve just handed me the sheet that was available at that meeting, which had the series of options, and with the understanding that none of these are hard and fast and that they might retreat from them, at that meeting, the range for the revetment went from 124 to 167.9 is thousands, and the range for the granite was 321 to 434, so about roughly almost three times the cost. So that was presented at that meeting. Now, what are we trying to accomplish right now at this discussion?
I think, if I could speak for Lee, right? One of the things I think he's trying to get accomplished here is that there's another option besides what we're talking about there, which is that we would look at this because maybe that cost could be different if it was a design build cost.
Yes.
That's what you're getting at.
That's what I'm getting at.
But then we have the chicken and egg thing that Billy brought up, which is, if you ask these guys to do this and we don't go that way, did they preclude themselves from building the other thing? And that's I'm a little worried about that.
Well, you answered that by telling Billy not to worry about it, and we went out and did an actual bid,
Right.
and they happened to get it, so your answer satisfied me as.
They bid properly, they'll bid properly.
If you do it in the bid process.
If we did an actual bid,
Right.
which we can do without any money other than authorizing things to put an ad in the paper, we could ask for bids to do this as part of the process, and that would be another thing that we would discuss. But then that gets back to, as being part of this discussion, is do we continue forward with the article stuff and doing what Ned's talking about with respect to doing what we said we would do?
Judy?
I lost my question.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
Another question from the audience.
Who said we were gonna do? That group, I mean, I'm missing a piece here. Who voted to proceed with revetment? This board? It certainly did not happen at the annual meeting.
Right.
So I'm just curious who recommendation was made at an overseers meeting, and the overseers voted on that, or that group in that initial meeting, or?
Yes.
I'm just trying to figure it out.
To the straw vote of the
Right.
30 or so people who attended the meeting said that, ranking the choices, that the revetment, and I think I recall many people saying, I'm surprised to hear that I'm voting for the revetment, because in a straw vote.
Right.
So, and I think because when you compared those numbers and those images, it seemed to make sense, and that the majority, I would say it was about We ranked them, right?
And the environmental long-term
Right.
thing for the cost, that was a factor too. It wasn't
Then the
just aesthetics
overseers,
and price.
at the July overseers meeting, because the revetment had won the straw poll, the overseers authorized the infrastructure committee to proceed with an investigation of the revetment model. At the annual meeting, as Steve has just confirmed, there was no particular authorization, there was no request of an authorization for the revetment. There was no rejection of the granite wall. There was a report that we were still pursuing all options. And you'll recall Wendy saying, wait, I don't want to mislead anybody. Here's our minutes from our July meeting. We've approved the revetment because there was a sense in the report that the villagers were being told all bets are still open. And Wendy wanted to assure that the villagers knew that at least in terms of our votes, the people who sat at this board, and I believe it was a unanimous vote, we had said, yeah, revetment is what we're going. Now, I think we've, to the extent that we hang out in the village, we have had an earful since then from people who express their opinions that revetment, so I don't want no stinking revetment, I want granite wall. So I think that that's where Mike came down with, let's get a peer review, first of all, because we're hearing now that the numbers we were looking at made no sense, or not made no sense, that the numbers we were looking at were not numbers that anybody should rely upon, they were just estimates, and we should have a peer review, particularly because of these geotechnical issues that had been raised by people who seem to know what they're doing. So what I understood where we are right now is the peer review, and that's what the next step is.
Let me stop you there. We were asked to do a peer review, and that's when you contacted PROC, which is what Billy's talking about.
Okay.
And
that was the question I lost, but where are we with the peer review?
Right, so, and we talked about that. So the peer review was to get some input from some contractors, and that's when they said they really didn't want to get a full-blown cost estimate, because they said it might preclude them from bidding, and I got the feeling that it was a combination of preclude them from bidding, but also showing their cards. So they didn't really want to do that, because if there's going to be a bid, why should everybody have their information? And I understand that. Okay, but the main thing in that discussion was that any vertical wall option was going to require the cofferdam, okay, because of the liability issues with that. And that's when we had the next meeting where we discussed, if we have a cofferdam, does it make sense to even consider the replace in kind option anymore? Because now you're talking about $100 grand for this cofferdam, plus or minus whatever it is. And do we want to do a vertical wall that we would have to replace in another generation, or do we want to put it, if we're going to spend the money on a cofferdam for any vertical wall option, we should go to the granite. And that's where everybody said granite is good, granite is long lasting. This is what we talked about the last meeting in November. And that's when I went back to the and said, this is what we've been charged with doing, but we really want to relook at this granite option too. And then I got a quote that was more than the cost, because they're doing two designs. And that's when I said, okay, well, how about you just do this? How far could you take this? And it wasn't far enough, because we need to spend some of that $25,000 on geotech work if we're going to get a real cost. And I said, okay, then now we have a different task, which is, again, adjusting that $25,000. Figure out what you need geotech-wise, not to build it, but to give us a cost. Because in the end, they can get to a point that's 75% design, for example. They don't know the details of exactly how it's going to be held up, but we know enough to know what the cost is. And then we could go to the meeting in August and say, this is the cost of this, and this is the cost of that. And now today we have a new wrench, which is part of this discussion of, do we also then try to work in a design-build option, because obviously that last option is the traditional design-bid-build.
But can I just ask one clarification? But is it correct to say that we don't, the numbers tossed around for the revetment, we still don't have numbers on that, right?
Right.
So we would need numbers on both options if we're going to,
Even if you go the design build route, you need to do it on both options.
on
I
both
think so.
options.
I think so,
So
yeah.
you're comparing real
And so
numbers
how-
to real numbers.
So are we saving money, which is part of the motivation, I'm saying a lot of your motivation in putting forth this motion? Do we actually save money if we still are challenged with the task of evaluating choices? I think that the community would want us to evaluate choices.
And what problem is there in putting it out to bid? I mean,
Both options.
I mean, you can put it out, you can put it out to bid, and you'll get the cost.
You gotta know what you want. Well, so, that's following up on Lee, is it out of the question to request design build proposals for revetment and for a granite wall?
Right.
And then we'll have costs. We'll have essentially two pools of vendors, or vendors who propose two projects. We can take the cost and the projects to the annual meeting and say, here's what we can do. We can build you a granite wall, we can build a revetment, and here are your costs.
And let the voters decide.
And does that eliminate most of the expense we're talking about now? Doesn't seem to delay the time frame, and it may be nuts, I don't know, but
It's my experience as an engineer, is that the bid is only as good as the request for bid. And if the request for bid is not well defined, because we don't know what the right now, based on the revetment option, if I was gonna do that, I'd say, it's gotta be revetment, it's gotta have all the parking. I'm gonna make all these decisions that haven't been made yet in the village with respect to that option to get it done. If I said, give me a bid with 4 options, they wouldn't even bid on it, because that won't work. So we don't have a tight design, pre-design to do that. We have this conceptual thing. It's not a big wall, it's not a major task, and that's what Lee's getting at.
Yes, that's right. And
It's not that big
how
a
many
deal.
times?
It's just we would have to make these decisions to get this bid package, and I'm uncomfortable doing that ahead of what the voters get providing.
How many times have we voted on this board to allow somebody to back over our land so that they can build a wall next to the ocean on their property that they didn't hire an engineer to do, they hired a contractor to come in there, the contractor came in, designed the wall, built it, without going through all this rigmarole, it cost like hell.
So, Mike, you may have already told us this, but if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, I'm sorry, I'm just a slow learner too. So if this was your business, what would you do? What would your next steps be to get us to where we need to go?
Okay, so the problem with that is we have the public aspect, okay? So if I could ignore the public aspect, I would do exactly what Lee said. I would hire somebody to go over options, right? I would maybe pay them to do some pre-permitting and see what they thought, and then get a look at some options, start to eliminate some, and then I'd pick one. But I'd pick one based on my client's preference, okay? And my client here is the villagers, and there's many, many different opinions. And I don't think we have, I think we have an opinion of a group of people that said the revetment is more natural, it looks more like it did all along, it's less expensive, there might be some moving of the seashore because of, you know, it's not as solid as a wall. And so I like that. And then we have people that say, we should have a solid wall there, we want as much land, I don't want to ever lose any parking, because with the revetment, you might lose parking over time. You know, 50 years from now, that could look different. There could be more material there, because it collects material, but it also could be less. And given the angle and what Lee's talking about, it's maybe more likely that there's less than more. But it can go either way. With the granite wall, we can draw a line and say, this is where it can be. Okay? There are 1,000 opinions that have been
But
expressed.
isn't it, can I just say, isn't it safe to
I just want to
Wait,
finish the
yeah.
question. So there have been 1,000 opinions. So in this case, if my client was the village, I would suggest to the village that you take the two of them to a certain point And then you go back to your people and say, these are the two options. This is one option here, one option there. And then at that point, decide, does the final design, the last part of the design, be done design bid build or design build?
And just for clarification, that's what you're proposing to do with the $25,000, is to get us to that point.
Yes.
Great, thanks.
Judy?
In terms of getting the two designs, whether it's design build or designs, out there before the annual meeting, what authority do we have today to get the two designs in front of the people? In other words, what's it going to cost us? We have a vote for only $25,000 to proceed with the seawall. To actually vote to build the seawall is another vote this year. We don't have authority to do design building. If we solicit a design build quote today, the guy's going to say $500 for this and $480 for that, and then he's going to, when the villagers in August say, okay, we like the $500, not the $480, or vice versa, the guy's going to say, that bid's no good anymore. You're talking now about doing this a year from now? My numbers change. So I guess that's one of my problems with the design build is we're going to get a number that is not a realistic number. We don't have authority to expend that number right now.
Michael?
I withdraw.
I mean,
Right.
my concern for Lee here is that we're going to go down this pathway if we do what we said we were going to do. And Lee and some of the other people are going to feel that the design firm, their estimate for the granite wall is too much because they didn't take into account some of the, I don't want to say corners that would be costs, but some of the cost savings that are done by contractors as opposed to engineers thinking about how do I do this in a way that protects me from being sued about my design, as opposed to somebody who says, this is going to stand up, I'll get a bond, I can guarantee it. So I just wanted to get that out there too.
Jeff?
Sorry I'm the newcomer to this, but am I hearing that this Board of Overseers in a previous meeting already approved a concept? And once this board has approved a concept, how do we go about walking back that approval in favor of another concept or potentially other options? That's just a question.
It's already happened at the annual meeting by the voters, didn't it?
No.
Steve read it out at the annual meeting. It said, here's 25,000 overseers, go do the engineering. Didn't say the
Didn't
word.
say for what option.
I don't know at what meeting it was, but after the summer, and there was a lot of pushback that was brought to the overseers, and we decided to regroup and look at this other option, where it came out. I'm not sure how officially we did it. We have to go back. That's where it came from.
All right, Mike?
In Gordon's, take what Gordon's saying, and tell me if this is wrong, but what I think you're saying is, at the meeting, people voted for this article because there was a discussion that we would revisit to some extent other options besides the one that had already been approved.
Specifically, yeah.
Right?
Right. Yes.
So that's what you're saying, right?
Correct.
Okay.
But that was not what's approved. Yes, Judy?
To answer, I hope, Jeff's question about how do we walk back a decision that we've already made, we vote to reverse the decision we already made. We're not bound by our previous decisions, and in fact, through life, if we made a mistake, we should always revoke and reconsider them. So we can do that. I agree, however, with Ned that there was a conscious decision by the 30 people who came to elevate revetment over granite wall in that meeting. I think the only way we have credibility in terms of revisiting the revetment discussion is to keep the revetment discussion out there and at least view that meeting was, we had 4 options, we narrowed it to 1. Further investigation has asked us to add another back to the mix, and now we're down to 2. I think that's where we need to be. We can't just simply say, we had a public hearing, everybody who took the time to come raised their hand for one thing, we said, yeah, that's cool, then I went to a cocktail party and everybody said, I want granite. That's not how we can do things.
I make a motion that we,
No, we're still,
You want to amend your motion, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah,
we are still in discussion on your motion.
Right, he's amending his motion.
Are you amending it? So-
Yeah, go
yes,
ahead.
So what is your amendment?
my amendment is to include both.
I knew that's where you're going with it. I would
Define
say-
both here for us that, you know, I've lost track of things.
Revetment and granite wall, is that what you mean by both?
I don't, is that a possibility? Well, first of all, is amendment, does that need to be seconded, this amendment?
The person who seconded the motion agrees to the amendment.
So,
Discussion now on the amendment.
I would like to define, oh, just the.
On the amendment, both. Steve?
I think what Lee has done was just basically said, I can live with the proposal, the way he approached it. So Mike went into quite a bit of detail yesterday about, I mean, the why. It's about the need to go forward with both, so we understand what we're doing, so we can move to design, build, or whatever else we want to do. It satisfies the group who advocate for some form of revetment, and it satisfies the group that advocate for granite.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
so my question is, can we do that within the $25,000 authority that we have? Because we have no authority to expend design money on the wall until August rolls around. See what I mean?
And I may be even installed.
That's,
So Article 18 said, to see if the Northport Village Corporation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, was consulting and engineering design studies to stabilize the banking at the bottom of North Ave and to supplement the funds requested in Article 8, which was $25,000, not to exceed an additional $15,000.
so we have 40,000.
Well, sure.
No, because there's some money that's.
Well, but I mean, you could start north with $5,000, see where it takes you, but move 10 to get the seawall done.
And that was going to be my next item, was I have them talking to them.
We're just telepathic, that's all.
Yeah. And
So I really think financially it could be done, and you still have contingency funds. So if and making up numbers on the fly here, you've got a total of 40, but you say, look, we're going to put 5 in the north, that gives us 40. We've got contingency, if we need another 5, we can take it out of contingency.
Further discussion on the amendment?
Yes, I believe that, and Lee, tell me if this is wrong, but I believe what Lee is saying is, he doesn't want to spend the 25/40. He wants to just go to getting bids, and based on those bids, we would go to the annual meeting, and then let people pick an option.
I would prefer that, yes.
And is it realistic to believe that the bid would have a life beyond 2019? So is it realistic to get a bid from Proc for version A and version B, vote for it in the summer, and then tell them they can start their work
Can
the following year?
you get a bid from Proc for a time frame that might be out further than a year?
Because we can't authorize the full expenditure except at the annual meeting.
Jeff?
Well, I was going to ask the same question. Can you put a time frame on the bid process? So we want a bid that's good for some period of time that goes beyond.
Steve?
So I just want to cycle back to what Mike said earlier, if I understood correctly. In order to ask for a bid, we need to know what we're asking for. And to bypass the process of the engineering and spending that $25,000, whatever it may be, means that we're just, back to Mike's point, if it was his property and he was just going to do it, he could figure that out. But we're dealing with a different situation here.
Yeah, so
And I think spending the money to get enough engineering to help us know what we want the bid to look like, which is what I think you were talking about.
yeah, so I have another suggestion, right? And this is the discussion to either amend or not amend, is that we cut the baby in half, okay? And I think that we should consider not spending the full 25K, okay? By taking it even less further along, to have the two options to a point that are costed maybe not 25, but plus or minus 35%, right? And then make this final decision, and then the final cost of engineering could either be in a design bid build package or a design build package. Is that reasonable?
That's reasonable.
Judy?
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, that the engineers that we've already approved would be instructed to only do enough engineering as is necessary to define the RFP for design build,
Yes.
for both.
And provide us what they think the cost is gonna be for those design
Right,
lots.
I'm on board with that.
Okay, so now you need to amend it again, I'm sorry.
And can you, well,
No, we're still in that, I think we're in this, Michael?
no.
Vicki?
I just have, so the sense I'm getting is that we're going to do this, and then we are going to, have we decided that we're taking this approval for one designer or another to the people and out of the overseer's hands? Because before it was the overseer's decision, and now we're going to take it to the people.
All along, the intent has been that in May and June, there were going to be public meetings, and then there has to be at the annual meeting, and the public has to vote. So we, ultimately, we'll make recommendations perhaps, but.
So one of the things that we talked about was multiple designs of the revet, which I will be pulling that part. I think I have the authority to pull that out. I'm only gonna go with the parking option, because I watched the parking this summer, and there isn't a parking issue with the number of spots. There's a parking preference issue, is what it comes down to, and I'm okay with that. If that's the preference of the villagers, because they kept saying, the people kept saying there isn't enough parking. There isn't enough parking as close as they wanted to their boats in the seashore and where they want to sit for lunch and look out. That's the issue. So that's it, that's fine. We'll only look at the option where we keep the parking down there, okay?
Well, I sort of wonder where I've been, because I think when it went back to when we approved the revetment, it was with the idea that that was our approval, and then we go to them and ask for the money for it. But now we're going to take the two options, take it to the people, they're going to vote, and then hopefully vote for the money for whichever one they decide that the people want.
So you're right, if we approve this motion, we ought to also have a motion to reverse the decision made by the overseers in July to present only one option, the revetment. Because the villagers at the annual meeting did not walk away with a sense that they had been limited already by express vote.
Right. Right. I
Then
understand.
I'll include that in my motion.
Bill?
But if you do that, then they're gonna go back to, well, we had 7 options, so we gotta do all 7.
Well, somebody's going to have to.
No.
That's why we started off this process with just the
Because
overseas.
we have the authority in
Work
theory,
it
right?
down.
Right. Pick one, yes.
But you're right, Bill, that is the natural consequence of revisiting every decision. But the two that offered cream that was rising was
Right.
revetments, which had a great deal of
Right, back up.
support for it, particularly the cost. And then the people who are whining aren't whining that the other 3 were off. They're whining because granite was off. So let's put granite back on.
Actually, they were whining that there was no vertical option. And I think
Yeah, that's the issue.
as the infrastructure has discussed this, we've decided that if we're going with a vertical, we want granite. Because otherwise, we're wasting money on putting up a coffer dam and the geotech and everything else. We'd want it to last a long, long
Mike,
time.
you can reword my motion how you, because you're better at explaining things than I am. I'm not great with words, but you know what I want.
You're just
Well,
fine.
do we know what the motion
That's the
is?
nice thing
Amy?
about the team.
I'm all over the place.
I think Amy's going to appreciate some clarification.
Right.
Yeah,
Steve, you
yeah.
had your hand up?
Yeah, just so, the issue of somebody wanting an option that the overseers don't present, we present to, somebody wants something different, is self-correcting at the annual meeting. They can propose that, it's determined as to whether or not it goes onto the warrant as an option. My opinion is we vote it down. If it isn't, that's the way the process is intended to work.
I would suggest that you withdraw your amendment and you withdraw your motion, and I'll just start over.
All right,
For Amy's sake.
I'll withdraw it.
First, the amendment, withdrawing the amendment
Yep.
and the motion.
Yep.
Okay, and then I would like to make a motion that with the $25,000 that we had allocated, that we look at 2 designs. So we started with a conceptual design, and now we're going to do a pre-design, right? And the
Correct.
pre-design is going to take us to somewhere between 50 and 75% design. And those 2 options would be the revetment option, and then the granite wall option, okay? We would take those to a place where they would put it into a design bid build package, okay? And that package would be the final, whatever is included in that would be, the final design would have to be included in that package. There will be enough geotech work done to get us a reasonable cost estimate. Now, these are going to be, you don't have to write this part down. These are going to be, so that's the end. And then I'll do that discussion.
I think reasonable cost estimate is very important.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Is there a second on that?
He is seconding.
Lee's seconding that. Discussion on that motion.
So it is going to be, it's not going to be a cost estimate that is this, you know.
I understand that.
It's going to be an apples to apples type thing.
It's a compromise.
Right, yes.
Is 25, I'm questioning the 25,000, what I was hearing was, is that there's potentially an additional pool. Are you limiting yourself? Is 25,000 sufficient to do what you're trying to do?
Yes.
He wants to limit it to even less.
No, what I'm saying is, we had talked about we needed more, and now I'm saying I'm going to cut the scope back to keep it on that. And then we still have that other project that is kind of in flux, so we're going to take that.
So the answer is yes, you feel like 25,000 is sufficient to get you to what you're describing in the motion?
Yes.
Steve hasn't thought.
I would not include that in the motion. We have funds approved that we can use, Mike
Right.
knows what we've got.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll figure out where
That's
it's
all right.
at.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I'm not sure that the bid package part of it will be in there, so we might need more money for that part of it.
Has money been expended already?
No.
Not yet.
I've been negotiating this contract.
So I agree with Steve that the motion should be amended not to include reference to any money, since the money related to this project has already been approved by the villagers.
But that part, yes, thank you.
Maybe I'll read this back
We
to
got
us.
it read, yeah.
I have down that Mike Lynn in motion, we look at two designs of revetment and granite wall option and take the two designs to a place to design bid package, which would be a final design in package.
For a reasonable estimate. Reasonable estimate is, I think, is important to you.
Right, the reasonable
Asking for a
cost
reasonable cost estimate.
for each design.
Does that sound right to you?
What's reasonable?
And when you,
Well,
I mean,
but I know, that's what you said, but I think that implies that it could change
Right.
versus estimate.
right.
That can't change.
and when the overseers go through the normal process of reviewing minutes for accuracy, if you need to wordsmith that a little bit, that's easy.
So the design, it's a design bid package, again, right? It's not a design build,
That's correct.
right? But it's gonna include whatever they need to do to finish the design. So then if it's a design builder and they can consolidate those costs, then theirs will be less, right?
That's right.
So that's what you're looking at.
That's what I'm looking at.
Okay, great.
Can I just ask for clarification? So is it assumed then, in that language, the design, that we're talking about not just the design of the structure, but the impact on the functionality in the area? Because in my understanding, is part of what this big disconnect is around people's perception of whatever they're looking at and a price tag is for whatever they're looking at, how it impacts how they're going to use the park, what impact it has on neighbors, where people park, and that's a lot of the scuttlebutt I've heard, and I don't know if it's whining, but that's an interesting word. I think it's just good feedback, that people are, that there's an issue of like, well, wait a minute, and the other thing is, I wouldn't overinterpret, I was at that meeting too, the under-attended meeting, and that was set up, those options were set up as, this is where we are, and that was a straw vote, and there was all kinds of language around, please no, and actually that was pretty risky to even take a straw vote, although in that meeting, the revetment was universally loved. It was a big surprise. However, there were a million questions around it at that point, and as I remember the annual meeting, it was very confusing to people, not just about what they're looking at and the price tag, but all these other issues. So is that assumed in this? And can we have it be clear that that's where we're headed? Because I think that's where, if I was watching this broadcast, I would still be unclear where we are.
Does this seawall design cover every aspect of what's going to change in Ruggles Park?
Parking, in other words.
Parking, water runoff, everything.
I am not going I'm not gonna have multiple revetment options. We can't.
No,
We
that's not what I'm saying.
And get this in, under the budget.
I'm saying pretty much the same thing he's asking. When you say seawall design, you're talking seawall, just like they talked about seawall. We want to know, is that seawall going to affect our parking, our circle, our water runoff, all the other things for that area? Is that all been taken into consideration of this seawall that we're talking about, these two designs?
Yeah.
Both designs,
Yeah.
not just one, both.
I mean, I hate to throw a wrench in, but yes, but it doesn't include anything that we've talked about at the utility meeting about analyzing.
No, that's not even, I ain't not even looking, I'm not even thinking of that.
Right, so other than that, yes, the idea was we talked about some catch basins, right?
Yeah.
Because once you dig that area out, that's the time to put it in.
But is that part of the seawall process? I mean, is that part of what the engineers are saying that we need to have that type of a seawall? That's what I'm getting at.
I don't think it's part of the seawall, I think it's part of the, remember, we've got a staging area and we've got a construction zone, right? In rebuilding the construction zone, we've got to look at how we're gonna.
But we need that cost price. They need that. They need to know what the total project is going to cost on
Yes.
both,
Right.
everything.
Right.
What it's going to cost us, even if it's a fairly close estimate.
Yes.
It's going to cost us $100,000 to do a revetment. It's going to cost us $400,000 to do a granite wall, and that takes care of every question that everybody has. Is
Yeah,
it going to
and
be
it-
parking? Is it not going to be parking? Is it going to be a circle? Is it not going to be a circle?
No.
That's what all this confusion's
Right,
about.
so, again, we're revising that again. The whole meeting we were gonna have about whether there was gonna be parking or not is now off the table. That's not part of this anymore. We're gonna make the assumption that it needs parking, okay? So that the cost of revetment is going to include moving that circle and stuff. And then later, if we decided at the annual meeting that we didn't want to spend that money and move it closer and forget the parking, it would be less than that.
Well, that's what I'm
So
asking.
we have the apples to apples comparison, knowing that we could potentially reduce that one in the future. But we're only going with one revetment option.
Right.
Judy?
So to follow up with a very good question from Michael, the result of this vote will be that we have two bundles of information that we will be presenting to the villagers. Those bundles of information, in order to be meaningful, should include what the law would look like, what the impact of use will be, so that we can then, at the annual meeting, decide which bundle of information is consistent with our the choices we want to make.
Right. And same with the revetment.
I don't think that, in other words, the numbers the design that we come out of this isn't going to be just, this is going to cost this much, and this is going to cost that much. It's going to be, and this is what you get for that.
Yes.
And as long as we have, this is what you get for the numbers we're putting on the table, this is a really healthy exercise.
Right, and but again, just to clarify, because I think, thank you, when we present it, I think it has to be presented as, and very clearly, the price, the design, and its impact, relative pros and cons, and relative merits of each. Because people were interpreting relative merits, and even in that public hearing.
Right.
And I think and so that's where I'm questioning, is that assumed in what we're about to vote on?
No. I can't add that to the package and get it done for the con. We're not, because we end up being too conceptual again. We need to say, this is what you're doing, this is what we want to cost on.
We're trying to compare apples and apples,
Yes.
not apples to oranges.
I think that's something that the infrastructure committee can write a memo that goes on top that talks about the
Yes,
pros and
correct.
cons.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're going to get the engineers to
No.
do that because that would use up too much of the funding.
All right, two more comments, and then we're going to take a vote on this at 12 o'clock.
Right, and again, Ned, my interpretation would have that meeting was the same as yours. It wasn't just an aesthetic thing with the revetment. There were lots of safety and long-term longevity issues.
Long-term longevity
Exactly,
is something that was a swaying thing for me.
That I thought, and I thought it was, educational and very informative. And with the revetment, so you're saying, I think that the question came the price that they were given, or the quote estimate, was for just the revetment, but not the work that needed to be done that would change there. The wall will not change this, but the revetment will change the circle and the parking situation. This is going to be included or not?
Yes.
It is, oh, is, okay.
Yes.
That's all right.
All that would be included.
That's included in
included
these.
the revetment.
So, okay, so people will know whether or not they have parking or a circle. Okay.
I agree with Mike's concerns. I think addressing those concerns, the addendum through the infrastructure committee is fine, and we have a lot of that data from the initial report on the
Yes.
multiple options, so I
Right.
think that's an easy fix.
Right, and I also want you to know that now, you know, we're talking about longevity. We're down to the two ones that are gonna last the longest. It's really, which one's gonna last longer? That's related to which angle does the storm come in, you know, so it's gonna be, you know, things that we won't be able to know for a fact. But when we were comparing, you know, granite, when we were comparing a revetment to a concrete wall, the concrete wall was not gonna last anywhere near the amount of time. When we were comparing it to the wooden structure, that wasn't gonna last near it. But, so from that point of view, we're kind of in the same ballpark. So that's not really necessary in the pros and cons. There will be opinions that we will include that, you know, that this one might move a little more than this one, or this one might move more in a different angle. We can talk
Okay,
about that.
I wanted,
We're getting away from.
Judy, is it
Judy,
The only thing, I would just remind us all that the approach we take to this today and throughout needs to be absolutely clear and consistent, because the conversation, you're right, I used an inappropriate word, finding, was about a sense of lack of clarity. The annual meeting was very, very opaque, and people did not like that opacity. And they were right to be confused and even felt a little sucker punched.
That's it.
So we need to say what we're talking about clearly and consistently.
And I think we also need to trust the infrastructure committee and trust Mike to interpret what's been going on with our discussions here appropriately. And I believe we have. Now, there is an open motion to essentially move forward with a apples-to-apples comparison of the two approaches, including what the parking would look like on the revetment side, such that we can come out with a approximate estimate with room for movement that could be massaged and then presented to the voters, to residents at town meetings, village meetings, and then to the voters. Any further discussion? Great. Not to hear it. Vote on that, please. Yes or no? And it's unanimous. Thank you. You have what you need?
Rural.
Okay, thank you.
So the next thing was North Ave, right?
Let's keep it sweet, short.
This is short. Last we were talking about Paul doing the Tootsie Roll option for the short term and getting an idea of the long term. I'm still working on that, trying to get the long term cost.
Good.
So we don't need to talk about that anymore, unless you have a question.
No, Jeff has just whispered in my ear that we need to make sure that we come back to that July decision, which seemed to put us on a track of only one option. And so I think that I would move to broaden the range of options that we cover, to not be limited to simply the revetment, but also the granite wall, the vertical granite wall, so that what we've just approved spending money on is consistent with our
A
goals.
second.
Lee, any discussion? Mike?
No, I was.
Hearing none, all in favor? Thank you. Very good, thank you. Infrastructure Committee, Utility Committee. Oh, there's more.
One more, which is what Judy had brought up relative to the VDOT. This is actually a good time, I think, to do it, because it's definitely, there's this sort of a short-term issue which has a lot of short-term safety issues, and then we have the long-term issue which has safety and infrastructure issues in it. And, we talked about me putting together a committee, ad hoc committee, and I have done that. I have a list of, there's two Northport Yacht Club members, Gordon, that have agreed. These are all people who have agreed to do it. Billy Haverty and Craig Brigham, and Gordon as the harbor master, wharf master, whatever we want to call him, as whatever his title is this year, representative. Jeff Wiltz as an overseer, myself as an overseer, and Jennifer Tabb as a non-vote owning kayaker. And she has agreed to be on it at least through the short-term part of this. We'll revisit it in the summer. And Billy Page, who has doesn't know what to do, is also included on the committee. So, I mean, I don't know how we decide whether we should formalize that committee. Jeff has agreed to chair the committee, so we've got together on that. And I downloaded everything I've done sort of to date, because some of this stuff I had to do before I was officially sworn in, so I had sort of kept it going. But that's where we are. We're going to meet via conference call and so on, and here, and come up with a short-term solution for this year and a long-term solution to bring back to the overseers to vote.
There were two particular action items, though, that we discussed.
Yeah.
One is to authorize Billy to investigate the cost of a ladder for the outfloat, I call it bad boy float, the outfloat, so that someone who falls in off of that float will have at least a ladder. So I would ask that be done before those floats go in. And the second is to investigate the construction of a ladder similar to the ladder we have on the front of the wharf, but on the boat float side of the wharf. We talked about having a ladder on the boat float itself and thought that there were some problems with that. So a ladder erected on the wharf itself, so that if someone falls off the inside boat float, they can at least reach pretty quickly a ladder. I think those are two action items we can approve today. So I guess that's a motion.
That's almost like a half ladder, right? It's not-
Just to get out of the water.
Just to get out of the water.
That's seconded by Lee. Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. Bill?
I got a cost price for the ladder for the outboard boys float. That's just doesn't include freight or anything, of roughly around $500. That's similar to what we use on the swimming pool.
Good. So this ad hoc committee is meeting post-haste, it sounds like, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay.
So do we have to formally approve that, or how does it work?
Ad hoc committees,
Oh, the
The
So
cash.
is that a motion then, did I make?
the cash, my motion on the $500 is,
Can we hold off on
Yeah, let's do
actually
both.
purchasing all
Yeah,
that?
yeah, we'll
Wait
just
till I
wait.
do the other?
Yeah.
And we can have them both together.
okay,
all right,
Let's do that.
because that's not going to happen right away.
okay. Yeah.
As far as the committee itself, I think I need to approve the,
So we have
like
to-
any committee.
So
Chair.
we moved that an ad hoc committee addressing waterfront safety, boat float safety, be appointed by the president, with appointing Jeffrey Wiltz as the chair of that ad hoc committee.
And it's under the auspices of the infrastructure.
Well, it's actually freestanding.
No? That's
Freestanding.
true.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Any discussion? So the understanding is that this committee will be led by Jeffrey, and that you'll report back to us with your recommendations?
Correct.
Great. Any further discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. Lee wasn't here.
He's for it.
So Jeff, it's all yours. Thank you. Now, infrastructure committee, anything else?
Sounds good for now.
Yes.
Oh, well,
Just a quick question on, so the committee that met Friday, the utilities board, do the overseers need to take formal action to appoint an overseer to that board?
Yes.
Because Wendy, of course, when she resigned from that board.
Yes.
And the discussion we had on Friday was I would chair the waterfront safety task force and recommend that Mike Lannon be appointed by the overseers to serve on the utility.
You were probably going to get
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, we're getting there anyways. That's the next thing.
that. So the last thing.
You'll recall, yeah, go ahead.
Just the last thing is Billy and I need to get together to put our wish list together for the roads for next year, which we need to do. Some Pleasant Lane's on there. It's not
So-
an easy one.
So, by the way, is waterfront safety the name of that ad hoc committee?
Sure.
I heard it used for the first time.
Waterfront safety and overcrowding. I mean, it's as much that.
People management.
Safety covers that. Safety covers that. So yes, so am I hearing that there's a switch occurring here? That you're going on to the,
Well, let's do the utility report.
Yes, I'm not done with that.
Okay.
okay,
So the utility report,
First
you'll
utility.
recall that last month when Jeffrey was kind enough to volunteer to serve on the Board of Overseers, there was a great deal of conversation as to the dominoes falling and what that meant to the utilities trustees. Jeffrey said that he would be available, that he would come up on Fridays, he lives here anyways. Mike also said, well, if it's too much of a burden for Jeffrey, then he would be happy to do it. There was some conversation led by me that, look, Mike, you have a lot on your plate. Over the course of the month, or 2 months since then, Jeffrey and Mike have spoken with one another, and Mike would like to be on the utility trustees, and one of the things that you never turn away a volunteer who says that's what I want to do, because they usually do it better. So the utility trustees met this Friday. Mike and Jeffrey were both at the meeting, and they want to make a recommendation that Mike, because he wants to, can fill the term left by Wendy. He would be the third overseer. You recall that we need 3 overseers and 2 non-overseers. So we would ask that you appoint the Michael to fill out Wendy's term. Mike, not Michael.
yes.
And I would add, he's a willing participant who has content, expertise, and knowledge that I don't have.
Never turn away someone who's got content knowledge.
So that's
So,
one
right.
action item for the utilities, and then we have a couple more.
Right, so I think we need a motion for me to appoint
Yeah,
Mike.
I had moved that.
I thought we just needed
Second
to
by
want.
Lee.
Yeah.
No, so right, and any discussion? All in favor? So, Mr. Lannon, you are now on the Utilities Committee, which frees up Mr. Wolf to be heading the Waterfront Safety Ad Hoc Committee.
So, are we on to utilities generally?
We're on to Utilities General.
Utilities generally, again, the plan is working beautifully, and that is through the great work of Billy and Bernie in particular, who still does his daily rumble down at the truck that we never see, but it's always great. And Dick McEnany is someone that we should always be grateful for. You will recall that our 301H waiver is an EPA permit, and that it has a lifespan, and it actually expired about 2009. We timely filed our re-application, and we have timely answered every single question they've ever posed to us. And we finally, this month, received action by the EPA approving the renewal of our 301H waiver,
Good.
subject to conditions. 2 conditions that are going to cause some big problems, not problems, 2 conditions essentially that are going to change the way we do things. We have a 30-day comment period to talk about these with the EPA, which is right now in suspension. So that we can fulfill our obligations, the utility trustees approved the hiring of Durago to do some engineering for some modifications that we're going to have to do to the little building, including perhaps getting a different little building in the base of the park to accomplish these goals. And that's because they're changing us to year-round treatment and chlorination, things that we cannot do in that little building right now because it's an uninsulated building. So Durago, the utility trustees hired Durago. They also hired Ethan Peabody, John Powell, my partner, to help in the comment period because the 30 days are before we meet again. And Dick is already on that, and I think that that's a good path forward. The plan that the utility trustees pretty much adopted was, look, 301H waivers are something that are not something that the EPA loves. This is a Clean Water Act thing. The Nordic Farms issue draws a lot of attention to the quality of the bay right now. So what we're going to focus on is not so much saying we don't want to do what you want us to do, because that might not be helpful, but instead focus on the compliance schedule. We simply cannot start doing some of the testing that they want us to do, given the way the plant is configured right now. So we'll be focusing on the compliance schedule. build a building, we have to find ways to put the building, we have to villager approval for all that thing. And of course, getting a commitment that while we're working with the EPA along that process, that they would not say, well, we're shocked that you are not testing like we asked you to. So no enforcement action. Those would be the principal comments that we'll be putting on there, is making something reasonable. We firmly believe that these people in Boston have no idea that our building is this big, and that you cannot stand up in it, and no one can safely do that in the wintertime.
And they probably have no idea that nothing is insulated.
Right.
That's our problem. They're asking us to do things year-round that we only do when it's not frozen outside like that.
So, and then Fernie was at the meeting as well, and was incredibly helpful in telling us the real-world concerns of these additional requirements. And so the third action that the utility trustees took was for Fernie and Bill and Dick to come up with an immediate plan that they will present in February in terms of worker safety for Fernie today. Because Fernie does a remarkable job. And because of the chemicals he's dealing with in that closed space, it probably is not the safest environment to put that worker in. So we will be revisiting different types of chemical delivery systems for some of the chemicals that we deal with, and looking for advice from the three people who know best how to make it safe. That's immediate, on a parallel track with the commentary with the EPA. So those are the three things we've done. Don't need any action from any of you, but they're important enough to take that time. This meeting today, even though we've been here 3 hours, to be more thorough in our report than we usually are.
Understood. Any questions for Judy on this?
I have one comment, and this is just in general, that you should all be aware of, that when Judy's talking about how we're going to have to rebuild that building, it's got to be a building where someone can stand up in. It's got to be a building that's insulated. It's got to be a building that where things are contained properly in the future. So when we revise it, it's going to be substantially bigger, and right now sometimes it's underwater, and it can't be in a place where it's underwater. So those are all things we're going to have to figure out down the road. Just right
In the same location.
Well, we don't think that we can build in the same location. We would be asking Derivo to be looking at what location, the tanks would of course stay in the same location. But where we do the testing, part of the report from Derivo is how do you engineer the solution. Maybe something at the bottom of the park where the floats typically
Where
sit.
the dead man is?
Yeah. Maybe we build a groovy seawall that has a door in it. To go underground cave.
Maybe a
I
bandstand.
mean, the fact of the matter is that little building, because of climate change, is more often, we never used to talk about high tide events, putting water in that building. Now we talk about it every month. So that little building, our septic system is sort of one of those things we should be talking about in any event.
And as someone who's worked on upgrades of pump stations quite often, there are a bunch of code things that we haven't even begun to consider that we will be discussing too, that will expand the size of it. So it will be bigger than over time.
So, I mean, does it naturally then come up to what we've been talking about with the seawall, all that, because it's the same area that you moved
Yes.
to?
Yeah, the good news is that this will be taking place before we do that other stuff or in parallel, so they can work with each other.
Might lose all our money on that building. And I just want to reiterate, I am big on compliance, okay? And I had a brief conversation with Bill, and I work in a very compliant, people with heightened awareness to compliance. And yeah, I keep talking. So,
Yeah, one thing I learned going to this meeting is that Fern takes these samples every day, 7 days a week himself. He hasn't missed a day in years. Isn't that amazing? I did not know that.
I remember you saying that.
It is amazing. It sometimes does make me a little bit nervous about the future, but that's not the discussion.
Well, and then that is also when we get to personnel, which, that we have two people who do so much more than what we pay for Billy and Bernie. So we will be talking about how we make sure that people want to keep doing what they do, and putting them in a safe work environment is part of that.
Town of Northport issues, is anybody
I just want to say, I had spoken to John after our last meeting and volunteered to go to the December meeting because I personally felt that somebody from Bayside might want to see what is going on in Northport, basically because of the salmon farm and other little things. I missed the December meeting, and then they didn't have their second one, so I was going to go. They're having a meeting tomorrow.
I'm going to that too.
So is that okay with everybody as I go as a
Please.
volunteer liaison?
And if you feel like out of that meeting or any particular notes that you'd like to pass along to us as information, certainly feel free to. Don't feel like you've got to hold until our next meeting in February.
Yeah, I just-
The two attorneys over here are going to that meeting.
I
And
heard
John and
there's-
I are going to also from that group to talk about some of the engineering aspects of it, because a lot of those issues they talk about where they're town and it's really good with respect to the land.
And Barbara, when we were talking about the zoning ordinance, I pointed out to her that from DEP's perspective and from Nordic Farms' perspective, their duty is to notify the municipality. So I've reminded her or asked her to please, if anything crosses your plate that looks like an action item that we have timelines for, please put it on our plate. She's assured us she will. So I think we'll take many legs stool that we're trying to build here.
Any comments by meeting attendees on agenda items we've covered thus far? New and continuing business. Request for 36 Broadway we already did. Our next meeting. Personnel HR Committee. This is something that it was Steve who originally proposed this, and it is a good idea. I have to be honest, it feels like we are in a committee building mode right now, and I agree about the value in it. I'm a little concerned about committeeing out, maxing out the people around this table. Yes?
I would suggest that we wait till his thing comes back and he's talked to Billy and we find out where the hole is, and then we start thinking about how we feel about it.
Right. But my view is we have someone in charge of personnel, Billy, who has an ear with you. Used to meet weekly with Joe to say, just to test the temperature, and I just want to, I know that there's other issues, vacation and yada, yada, yada. but-
Brief comments though. So for several years I've functioned in that role and have written and had approved by the overseers all of our existing policies and procedures. And it's clear that you need that presence, honcho in that, and that person needs to be an overseer.
For this?
Personnel. Yep.
If I have an issue, I've been going to him still for some issues that the book doesn't cover. And he's like, I can't
Okay.
really tell you.
So I think it is an issue to address.
So you're
Just on it.
suggesting we need to do it today?
No.
We can do that next meeting, right?
But we
Not
said-
if you want to do a constructive
You
meeting.
need to do it at some point.
Thank you.
One more, new business, not
Please.
HR thing.
Please.
I found the presentation actually from the salmon people, for lack of better, interesting, and I'm wondering if, to plan ahead, we take some of this information that we get, the articles, take a piece of one of these walls, so that when spring and summer come, we'll have that. I thought those maps were extremely good for an awareness of what was happening to our little piece of the world. Is that okay with everybody? Is that an idea?
It's a great idea. I would like to hear more about how that would specifically play out, because
Do you
there's
mind if
going to
I
be a
go?
lot more visuals. There is a lot out there extant in terms of
Yeah,
the effect
Yeah,
of
but just
Northport.
pick a ball to Nordic Farm News.
Yeah.
And then, I think that's a great idea.
I'll take care of
At the
it
hall.
then. Is that okay? I'll take care of
Bill?
it, just to take it off everybody's.
Bill?
Make sure you have the discussion with these people next to them.
Right.
Oh,
They think they don't
don't
have Steve
move.
behind
Yeah,
us.
we won't move this space.
Oh, no, it has to be out in a place.
Well,
where-
same thing out there, they tell me.
They get
the same
very,
thing.
very testy about that.
Who are those
Yes.
people next to
The
the
Historical Society. But they in fact do not control that space out there, and so I would, yes, you can advise them, but Michael?
Just I'd like to ask for clarification on
I've put stuff up.
when we, in the meeting minutes, when we characterize, first of all, one question. Are we going to characterize this presentation in some summary in the meeting minutes that was made about the salmon farm? And if we do, can we be clear about what our next steps are, where we are as a board, because I've been asked a number of times, what are we doing about X? And so I think we just, maybe it's two parts. One is, are we putting anything in the meeting minutes about this presentation, the fact that they came, et cetera? And then can we, if we do, can we put something in about what we as a board, where we are around at this moment in time?
Well, I think the science,
Let's do
that what's in the minutes is totally defined by what we approve of. So when you see the draft, be aggressive, in my view, in rewriting what Amy does. It's not Amy's minutes.
Yeah.
There are, and my view is, let's show ourselves in our best light. So in that instance, with those people, we would say that David and I can't remember her name, Kim, made a presentation on behalf of resident, whatever the group was called,
Upstream.
upstream, and we thanked them for their presentation. That's piece one, right? The piece two is, if we're going to take a position, we need action, and action items to do that, and we haven't yet said that.
Right, but I think that's what we need to say.
We have made an action item to not take a position. That's in there somewhere.
Right.
We have decided as a group,
That we'll continue to
we will
gather
gather information and dispense information, but not take a position.
Right, so I think we need
If you
to,
want us to change that.
That was back in the
September.
summer-ish,
Summer.
feels like, yeah. When that was.
But just to reiterate is all I'm
Right.
saying. So
Yeah, reiterate, right.
Amy's hearing this, so
people don't.
yeah, and so read the,
Judy?
That's where we are right now, but we can always change that.
right.
Yeah, Judy?
Were you moving on to something else?
No, we're still in new and continuing business. Is there something you'd like to address?
I just wanted to put you all on notice that it's Emily's wedding shower on February 17th, so I won't be here. I try really hard to make all the meetings, so it causes me profound anxiety not to be here, and I apologize. Then what's worse about that is I won't be at the April meeting because I'm traveling.
To the wedding.
No, the wedding's the weekend before, so if there was any enthusiasm for changing the date of the February meeting, I know that you all have already
You're
planned
asking
it,
us
but
to change the.
I'm not asking you to.
Actually, I would be up for that. Is that Washington?
It's Washington's birthday weekend.
I would be up for changing that also.
yeah.
I'm actually going to be out of town
Oh, I hear a lot of enthusiasm.
So would we push it or push it out or
10th,
move it in?
the 24th are on.
I would go to either of those.
And I
I'll
have,
go to the 24th because I'm going to be in surgery and I'm still going to be recovering, so
For?
24th would be better.
No, I was saying for what
not
surgery?
on the table.
Cancer.
Okay. We'll be taking care of you. But the 24th, is that what I'm hearing?
I will be
You'll be out of town, but you'll be here. Otherwise,
10th?
I'll be out of town,
on the 24th.
Okay, let's try the 10th.
February is a bad month all around because there's all sorts of things.
Okay, 10th?
The
Okay,
10th?
Let's just see, who can be up here on the 10th?
There's no financial data, so there's no need for me to be here.
On the 10th.
I can try by phone.
I would push for the 24th then because it feels like,
Can we have a hand to see who's
The only
here
one
on
who's
the
not
10th?
here on the 24th is Steve. He would have financials.
we would have financials, but he wouldn't be
I
here.
don't know if I can come in
You may-
person, does that impact us on the 24th?
As long as we have a quorum, as long as there's 4 people at the table, would you be able to be here? And you don't have to change it on my account. I
Well,
can't.
no,
Yeah, there'd be
but
four.
I would
Well,
prefer
you could be
to
here.
move it from
I have
seven
to call in
to
too, but I just can't do it.
I can be here on the 10th and the 12th.
1, 2, 3,
I can be here on the 24th.
4. Thank you.
Okay,
And
so
presumably
24th.
Dick.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we're moving to the 24th?
24th, and will you
What do you need?
contact Dan, or you want me to contact Dan on that?
Thank you.
That's good. You don't
Thank
miss
you.
too many.
Yeah, and then the missing in April doesn't cause me the same anxiety.
What's here today, Judy?
Our date is the April 16th, it's the week after Emily's wedding.
It's
April
the 17th.
17th, yes, you're right, the 17th. Red cloud.
So that wasn't too bad an issue to bring up.
Oh, that doesn't sound fun.
2/24,
Well, no, it's actually
It's gonna be
April
fun,
14th.
okay.
What?
Yeah, Palm Sunday, April 14th, you're right.
Are we changing another date here?
not
No,
yet,
no,
not yet.
no,
Let's
that's
just stay
just-
with February for the moment.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to change
So
it.
February is now the 24th.
February's the 24th. And we'll find out in advance who can be here. You're a no, but you'll have financials for us.
I will.
Anything else? If not, I declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much.